Welcome, fellow wanderer of the endless seas, to the shadowed chronicle of power itself, the vast and terrible machinery that governs the world of One Piece. Tonight, we delve into the world government, that ancient institution whose tentacles reach into every corner of civilization, whose authority shapes the lives of billions, and whose secrets stretch back 8 centuries into the forbidden darkness of the Void Century. This is a tale of absolute power and absolute corruption, of noble intentions twisted into tyrannical control, written in the blood of those who dared to seek forbidden knowledge. So settle in, let the weight of history carry you into peaceful slumber as we explore the empire that rules from shadows. The foundation of the world government stretches back through 8 centuries of accumulated power, its roots planted in soil watered by blood and secrets that the world was never meant to remember. To understand the machinery that governs the seas today, we must journey to those distant years when 20 kingdoms made a pact that would reshape civilization itself, creating an empire that would endure longer than any dynasty in recorded history, while hiding truths so profound that their revelation could shatter the very concept of legitimate authority. The Great War of the Void Century remains the most carefully guarded secret in human history, its details erased with such systematic thoroughness that even the whisper of its existence once condemned entire civilizations to destruction. Yet fragments of evidence suggest a conflict so vast and transformative that its echoes still shape the world's political landscape nearly a millennium later. On one side stood an alliance of 20 kingdoms, each ruling their own territories according to ancient customs and traditions that had governed their peoples for generations beyond memory. On the other side stood forces that history has been forbidden to name, led by a figure whose very title has become legend, Joy Boy. The nature of this ancient conflict transcends simple territorial disputes or dynastic succession wars that typically define the rise and fall of nations. Evidence suggests that fundamental questions about the nature of governance, the rights of rulers versus the freedom of the governed, and the proper relationship between power and responsibility lay at the heart of this struggle. Joy Boy and his allies appear to have represented something that terrified the 20 kingdoms so profoundly that they felt the complete erasure of historical memory was preferable to allowing future generations to learn what had truly transpired during those 100 years of darkness. The advanced civilization that existed during the Void Century possessed technologies that modern science is only beginning to rediscover, capabilities that make the current world's greatest achievements seem primitive by comparison. Ancient weapons capable of destroying islands with single strikes, robots powered by sources of energy that remain mysterious even to contemporary researchers, and communication networks that span the globe all speak to a level of sophistication that raises troubling questions about why such knowledge was deliberately suppressed rather than preserved and expanded upon. The alliance of 20 kingdoms emerged victorious from this titanic struggle, though the cost of their victory appears to have been so enormous that they immediately set about ensuring such a conflict could never occur again. Their solution was not merely to defeat their enemies, but to rewrite history itself, creating a new narrative that positioned their alliance as the natural and inevitable result of humanity's desire for order and stability. The formation of the world government 800 years ago thus represents not just the establishment of a new political system, but the successful implementation of the most comprehensive information control operation in recorded history. The physical manifestation of this new order took shape atop the Red Line, where the Holy Land of Mariewa was constructed as a monument to the Alliance's triumph and a symbol of their eternal authority. The choice of location was deeply symbolic, placing the seat of government literally above the rest of the world, accessible only to those deemed worthy of approaching the heights where power resided. The architecture itself spoke to concepts of divine authority and temporal permanence, every stone placed with the intention of communicating that this government was not merely another dynasty that would rise and fall according to the usual patterns of history, but something transcendent and eternal. The empty throne that became the centerpiece of Mariéhua embodied the philosophical foundation upon which the entire system was built. The promise that no single individual would ever again wield the kind of absolute authority that could threaten the established order. This commitment to collective rule among equals represented a revolutionary departure from traditional monarchy, acknowledging that concentrated power inevitably corrupted those who wielded it, while creating instability that threatened everyone's interests. The throne's emptiness was intended as a perpetual reminder that the age of god-kings had ended, replaced by a system where decisions emerged from consensus among those who had proven their worthiness through successful governance of their own territories. The transformation of the 20 royal families into the celestial dragons marked the most profound philosophical shift in the new order, elevating them from mere rulers to beings who were considered fundamentally different from ordinary humanity. This elevation was not simply ceremonial, but represented a complete reimagining of the relationship between those who governed and those who were governed. By declaring themselves descendants of the creators of the world's peace, the celestial dragons positioned themselves as living embodiments of the principles that had ended the chaos of the Void Century and brought stability to a world that had been torn apart by war. The establishment of the heavenly tribute system created the economic foundation that would sustain this new order across the centuries, transforming the voluntary alliance of equals into a hierarchical empire where member kingdoms purchased protection and legitimacy through regular payments to their divine protectors. This system served multiple purposes beyond simple revenue generation, creating economic dependency that made rebellion financially ruinous, while providing the resources necessary to maintain the military forces that ensured compliance. The tribute also served as a regular reminder of the relationship between center and periphery, with each payment acknowledging the fundamental inequality between those who ruled from Mariéhua and those who governed at their sufferance. The creation of the Marine Forces as the military arm of this new government represented perhaps the most successful aspect of the entire system, transforming what had once been the personal armies of individual kingdoms into a unified force dedicated to maintaining peace and order across the world's oceans. The Marines were deliberately structured as an international organization whose loyalty transcended national boundaries, their members drawn from all corners of the world and united by common training, shared values, and collective commitment to protecting civilian populations from the chaos that had characterized the pre-government era. The genius of the Marine system lay in its ability to transform the natural human desire to protect others into a force that served the government's broader strategic objectives while maintaining genuine moral legitimacy among both its members and the populations they served. By positioning themselves as protectors of the innocent rather than enforcers of political control, the Marines created a buffer between the world government's more controversial policies and the everyday experience of ordinary citizens who benefited from their presence without necessarily supporting the system that deployed them. The establishment of the first Cypherpol organizations marked the government's recognition that maintaining order required capabilities that went beyond what conventional military forces could provide, necessitating the creation of specialized units capable of gathering intelligence, conducting covert operations, and eliminating threats before they could destabilize the carefully constructed balance of power. These shadow organizations were designed to handle the kinds of problems that could not be addressed through open military action, dealing with threats to state security through methods that the government preferred to keep hidden from public scrutiny. The systematic suppression of historical knowledge about the Void Century became the defining obsession of the new government, driving policies and decisions that might otherwise seem irrational or counterproductive. The creation of the poneglyphs, as indestructible records of true history, represented perhaps the greatest ongoing threat to governmental legitimacy, their existence serving as perpetual reminders that official narratives were incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. The government's response to this challenge was characteristically thorough, involving not just the prohibition of poneglyph research, but the systematic elimination of anyone capable of reading these ancient texts. The decision to destroy O'Hara and its community of scholars represented the logical extreme of this policy, demonstrating that the government was willing to sacrifice entire civilizations to protect its foundational secrets. The message sent by O'Hara's destruction was clear and unambiguous. Some knowledge was so dangerous that seeking it warranted complete annihilation, not just of those who possessed it, but of anyone who might have been exposed to it. This extreme response reflected deep-seated fears about what might happen if the true history of the Void Century ever became widely known. The transformation of the voluntary alliance into an hereditary empire occurred gradually over the first few generations of government rule, as the practical necessities of administration slowly eroded the egalitarian principles that had supposedly guided the system's creation. The descendants of the original 20 kings found themselves inheriting not just titles, but the accumulated power and privilege that came with generation after generation of ruling from positions of unquestioned authority. What had begun as a temporary arrangement for managing the transition from war to peace became a permanent system where authority flowed from bloodlines rather than capability or popular consent. The establishment of marriage alliances, inheritance laws, and social customs that reinforced the separation between the celestial dragons and ordinary humanity created institutional barriers that made reform increasingly impossible, even when individual world nobles recognized the system's flaws. The children of gods were raised from birth to consider themselves fundamentally different from and superior to the rest of humanity, their education and social environment carefully designed to prevent the development of empathy or understanding that might lead them to question their inherited privileges. The relationship between the world government and the individual member kingdoms evolved from partnership to dominance, as the central authority gradually assumed greater control over local governance, using economic pressure, military threat, and diplomatic manipulation to ensure compliance with policies that served the empire's interests rather than those of individual member states. The kingdoms that had once been equal partners in the alliance found themselves reduced to administrative units in a vast bureaucratic machine, their traditional autonomy sacrificed to the demands of maintaining order across an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The periodic revelry gatherings that brought together the rulers of member kingdoms served multiple functions beyond their official purpose of facilitating democratic decision-making about global policies. These assemblies provided opportunities for the world government to assess the loyalty and reliability of its subordinates, to identify potential sources of dissent or rebellion, and to reinforce the hierarchical relationships that kept the entire system stable. The careful choreography of these events, from the seating arrangements to the agenda items discussed, reflected the accumulated wisdom of centuries spent managing the delicate balance between the appearance of participatory governance and the reality of centralized control. The development of the world government's intelligence networks and information control systems reached levels of sophistication that would remain unmatched for centuries, creating capabilities for monitoring and manipulating public opinion that extended far beyond what conventional military forces could achieve. The systematic cultivation of informants, the strategic placement of government sympathizers in positions of influence, and the careful management of information flows all contributed to an environment where dissent could be identified and addressed before it posed serious threats to stability. The evolution of governmental philosophy from the original idealism of the 20 Kingdoms alliance to the pragmatic authoritarianism that characterized later periods reflected the accumulated cynicism that came with centuries of wielding power over populations that could never be fully trusted to make decisions that served the greater good. Each generation of leaders inherited not just the machinery of government, but the psychological burden of maintaining systems that they increasingly recognized as necessary evils rather than positive goods. Their personal moral compromises, accumulating over time into institutional cultures that prioritized stability over justice. The integration of various non-human species into the government's sphere of influence created additional layers of complexity that tested the flexibility and adaptability of a system that had originally been designed to govern human populations exclusively. The different needs, capabilities, and cultural traditions of fishmen, sky islanders, and other species required modifications to standard governmental procedures, while raising fundamental questions about the universality of the principles upon which the entire system claimed to be based. As decades turned into centuries and centuries accumulated into the better part of a millennium, the world government evolved from an alliance of convenience into something approaching a force of nature, its continued existence taken for granted by populations who had never known alternatives to its authority and could not imagine what the world might look like if different choices had been made in those distant years when the foundations of the current order were first laid. The weight of accumulated tradition, the momentum of established institutions, and the simple human tendency to accept familiar arrangements as natural and inevitable all combined to create a system that seemed as permanent and unchangeable as the ocean itself, its ancient origins forgotten by all except those whose very existence depended upon ensuring that certain truths remained forever hidden from the light of day. The Marines stand as the most visible face of the world government's authority, their white uniforms and fluttering flags serving as symbols of order and protection that have sailed every ocean for 8 centuries. Yet beneath this facade of noble purpose lies an institution whose evolution reflects the gradual corruption of idealistic principles by the practical demands of maintaining global dominance. To understand the Marines is to witness the tragedy of good intentions systematically perverted by systems that reward obedience over conscience and strength over wisdom, creating an organization where heroes and villains wear identical uniforms while serving masters whose true nature remains hidden in shadow. The philosophy of marine justice began with concepts so pure and straightforward that they could have been written by children dreaming of a better world. Protect the innocent, punish the wicked, maintain peace through strength guided by moral certainty. The first Marines who took their oaths believed they were joining a crusade against chaos itself, sworn to defend civilization against the forces of darkness that had plunged the world into the horror of the Void Century. These early recruits possessed the kind of moral clarity that made every decision simple, every enemy obvious, every victory a step toward the perfect world their organization existed to create. The transformation of these noble ideals into the complex and often contradictory doctrines that guide modern marine operations represents one of history's most profound examples of institutional drift. The gradual process by which organizations evolve away from their founding principles through countless small compromises and pragmatic adjustments that seem reasonable in isolation, but collectively create something entirely different from what was originally intended. Each generation of marine leadership inherited systems that were already imperfect and made modifications that seemed necessary at the time, but further distance the organization from its original vision of simple moral justice. The hierarchical structure that governs marine operations, from the lowest recruit to the fleet admiral, reflects centuries of accumulated wisdom about the challenges of maintaining discipline and coordination across an organization that spans the globe. Yet this same structure creates barriers to moral reasoning that allow systematic injustices to persist indefinitely. The chain of command that enables effective military operations also ensures that questionable orders flow downward without the kind of scrutiny that might prevent their implementation, while the culture of unquestioning obedience that is essential for battlefield effectiveness becomes a tool for suppressing the moral independence that might lead subordinates to refuse illegitimate commands. The recruitment process that draws young people into Marine service remains fundamentally honest in its appeal to their desire to make the world a better place, offering them the opportunity to join something larger than themselves, while providing the training and resources necessary to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The recruiters who travel from island to island seeking new members genuinely believe in the mission they represent, their own service having convinced them that despite its flaws, the Marine organization represents humanity's best hope for maintaining civilization in a world where chaos lurks just beyond the horizon of every peaceful harbor. The training facilities where these idealistic recruits are transformed into effective fighting forces serve multiple functions beyond simple skill development, gradually reshaping their understanding of morality to align with organizational needs, while building the psychological bonds that will sustain them through the moral ambiguity they will encounter in actual service. The instructors who guide this process are themselves products of the system they perpetuate, their own moral compromises, providing templates that their students unconsciously adopt while believing they are simply learning to be better Marines. The concept of justice that supposedly guides all Marine actions has evolved into something far more complex and problematic than the simple moral principles that inspired the organization's creation, branching into multiple philosophical schools that provide intellectual justification for almost any action that serves the government's broader strategic objectives. Absolute justice demands the elimination of all threats to order, regardless of the collateral damage such elimination might cause, treating the preservation of the system as more important than the welfare of any individuals who might be harmed in the process of maintaining it. Lazy justice acknowledges the impossibility of perfect moral certainty in complex situations, advocating for pragmatic approaches that balance competing demands, while recognizing that every choice involves moral costs that must be weighed against potential benefits. This philosophy appeals to Marines who have witnessed enough of the world's complexity to understand that simple moral rules often provide inadequate guidance for real-world situations, yet it also provides convenient justification for avoiding difficult decisions that might require personal sacrifice or professional risk. Moral justice attempts to maintain connection to the organization's original idealistic principles, insisting that the means used to achieve ends matter as much as the outcomes themselves. Yet practitioners of this philosophy often find themselves isolated within an organization that views their scruples as obstacles to effective action. The Marines who cling to these principles face constant pressure to compromise their values or accept marginalization within their own organization, creating internal conflicts that can destroy careers and personal relationships while accomplishing little in terms of actual reform. The Four Blues serve as training grounds where young Marines learn their craft against opponents who are generally less dangerous than those they will encounter in the Grand Line. Yet even these supposedly safer waters contain examples of corruption and moral compromise that introduce recruits to the ethical complexities they will face throughout their careers. The Marine bases scattered across these seas operate with varying degrees of independence from central authority, creating opportunities for local commanders to implement their own interpretations of marine justice, while providing examples of what the organization can become when freed from or corrupted by the pressures that define service in more dangerous waters. The Grand Line represents the true test of marine effectiveness and moral integrity. Its islands populated by pirates whose strength and cunning far exceed anything found in the outer seas, while presenting moral challenges that defy simple categorization. The Marines who serve in these waters must constantly balance their duty to maintain order against their recognition that the system they serve often perpetuates injustices as great as those they are sworn to prevent, creating psychological stresses that drive some to excellence and others to breakdown or corruption. Notable Marine families whose members have served across multiple generations provide examples of how institutional culture perpetuates itself through personal relationships and inherited expectations. Children growing up within military communities where service to the government is presented as the highest possible calling, while the moral costs of such service remain unexamined. These families often produce some of the Marines' finest officers, while also demonstrating how systemic problems persist when they are never subjected to outside scrutiny or genuine reform efforts. The various interpretations of justice that guide different Marine officers reflect not just philosophical differences, but practical responses to the impossible demands placed upon an organization that is expected to maintain order across a world where the definition of order itself is constantly contested. Officers who embrace absolute justice often rise rapidly through the ranks because their willingness to prioritize results over methods aligns with institutional incentives, while those who insist on maintaining moral standards often find their careers stagnating as they are passed over for promotions that go to more flexible colleagues. The relationship between Marines and the civilian populations they are supposed to protect varies dramatically depending on local conditions, the quality of leadership, and the specific challenges each region faces. Yet patterns emerge that reveal systemic problems within the organization that no amount of individual virtue can completely overcome. In the best cases, Marine bases become genuine pillars of their communities, providing security and disaster relief while fostering relationships built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the common good. In the worst cases, these same bases become centers of oppression where military authority is used to extract wealth and obedience from populations who have no recourse against abuse. The corruption that infects many Marine installations represents not just individual moral failure, but the predictable result of placing fallible human beings in positions of authority without adequate oversight or accountability. Measures. While the institutional culture that develops around such corruption often persists long after the original perpetrators have been removed or reformed, the process by which good people become complicit in bad systems demonstrates the insidious nature of institutional evil, which operates not through dramatic acts of villainy, but through the gradual normalization of practices that would have horrified those who first encountered them. Marine bases serve as microcosms of the broader world government system, their internal dynamics reflecting the tensions between idealistic principles and pragmatic necessities that characterize the entire organization, while providing examples of how power corrupts even those who begin with the best intentions. The commanders who preside over these installations face constant pressure to demonstrate results that justify their positions and budgets, creating incentives for aggressive action that may not serve the broader cause of justice, but provides the kind of measurable outcomes that satisfy their superiors. The culture of unquestioning obedience that is essential for military effectiveness becomes problematic when it prevents subordinates from raising moral objections to orders that violate the principles the organization supposedly exists to uphold, creating a system where individual conscience is systematically suppressed in favor of collective action that serves the institution's immediate needs rather than its long-term mission. The Marines who resist this culture often find themselves isolated and ineffective, while those who embrace it may achieve professional success while losing the moral clarity that initially drew them to service. The eternal struggle between duty and conscience that defines the Marine experience reflects broader tensions within any organization that claims moral authority, while serving political masters whose own morality is questionable at best, creating impossible situations where there are no clearly right answers. And every choice involves moral costs that must be borne by individuals who never asked to shoulder such burdens. The officers who navigate these challenges successfully often do so by compartmentalizing their moral reasoning, allowing them to function effectively within the system, while maintaining some degree of personal integrity through careful selection of which battles to fight and which compromises to accept. The evolution of Marine doctrine over the centuries reflects changing strategic priorities and lessons learned from countless encounters with pirates, revolutionaries, and other threats to the established order. Yet this evolution has been guided more by practical considerations than moral reflection, resulting in an organization that is increasingly effective at maintaining the status quo, while becoming less capable of distinguishing between legitimate order and systematic oppression. The institutional memory that preserves tactical knowledge and operational procedures has been less successful at maintaining connection to the moral principles that originally justified the organization's existence. The psychological toll of Marine service extends beyond the obvious dangers of combat to include the moral stress that comes from serving an organization whose methods often contradict its stated principles, creating internal conflicts that can manifest as cynicism, fanaticism, or various forms of psychological breakdown that the institution recognizes but does not adequately address. The support systems that exist for dealing with physical trauma are far less developed when it comes to moral injury, leaving many Marines to struggle alone with questions that have no satisfactory answers within the framework of their organizational loyalty. The training programs that prepare Marines for leadership positions emphasize tactical and strategic thinking, while providing little guidance for navigating the ethical complexities they will encounter in actual command situations, creating officers who are technically competent but morally unprepared for the responsibilities they will inherit. The assumption that good people will naturally make good decisions ignores the ways in which institutional pressures and systemic incentives can corrupt even the most well-intentioned individuals when they are placed in situations where moral compromise seems necessary for organizational success. The relationship between the Marines and other branches of the world government creates additional layers of complexity and moral ambiguity, as Marine officers often find themselves supporting or covering for activities conducted by Cypher Pol agents or World Noble, demands that violate everything the Marines supposedly stand for, while being told that such support is necessary for maintaining the larger system that enables them to do good work elsewhere. These collaborations force Marines to become complicit in injustices they personally oppose, while being unable to speak out against practices that undermine their organization's moral credibility. The process by which Marine officers advance through the ranks tends to select for certain personality traits and moral flexibility that may not align with the organization's stated commitment to justice and protection of the innocent, creating leadership structures populated by individuals who are skilled at navigating bureaucratic and political challenges, but may lack the moral courage necessary to challenge systemic problems or resist pressure to compromise their problems. Principles for professional advancement. The 4-year cycle of government policy reviews and the quadrennial reverie provide opportunities for Marine leadership to advocate for changes in their organization's mission and methods. Yet these formal processes are dominated by political considerations that often override moral arguments, resulting in policies that serve the world government's immediate interests rather than the long-term health of the Marine organization or its ability to fulfill its original mission of protecting the innocent and maintaining just order. As we witness the Marines in their current form, we see an organization trapped between its noble origins and its corrupt masters, populated by individuals whose personal virtue is constrained by institutional systems that reward compliance over conscience and effectiveness over ethics. The tragedy of the Marines lies not in any fundamental evil within their ranks, but in their transformation from an organization dedicated to justice into a tool for maintaining an unjust system. Their blue uniforms now symbols of both protection and oppression depending on who wears them and how they choose to interpret the impossible demands of service to an empire built on hidden foundations of lies and systematic exploitation of those they were once sworn to protect. The admirals stand as living embodiments of the world government's ultimate authority, their very existence serving as proof that some individuals possess power so overwhelming that entire nations must bend before their will. These 3 figures represent the pinnacle of military achievement within the Marine hierarchy, each one a force of nature whose presence on any battlefield fundamentally alters the strategic calculations of every participant. Yet their elevation to such heights of power comes with burdens that extend far beyond the simple application of devastating force, transforming them into symbols of governmental authority whose every action carries implications that ripple across the political landscape of the entire world. The 3-admiral system emerged from centuries of strategic thinking about the optimal distribution of military power, balancing the need for overwhelming force projection against the dangers of concentrating too much authority in any single individual's hands. This numerical limitation ensures that no admiral can operate without some degree of institutional oversight, while preventing the dilution of effectiveness that might result from spreading elite capabilities across too many positions. The careful maintenance of exactly 3 admiral positions reflects deep understanding of organizational dynamics and political psychology, creating a structure that maximizes both military effectiveness and systemic stability. Each admiral represents decades of accumulated combat experience and strategic thinking, their appointment marking not just personal achievement, but institutional recognition that they have transcended normal human limitations to become something approaching natural forces whose intervention can determine the fate of entire civilizations. The process by which individuals reach this level of capability remains largely mysterious to outside observers, involving not just exceptional natural talent, but years of training that push both body and mind beyond conventional boundaries, while fostering the kind of absolute commitment to duty that enables them to wield world-shaking power without being corrupted by its possession. The devil fruit powers that typically characterize admiral-level combatants represent some of the most devastating forces in nature, transformed into weapons that can be deployed with surgical precision or overwhelming destructive capability, depending on the tactical requirements of each situation. These abilities often reflect fundamental forces of the natural world: light, ice, magma, gravity, suggesting either remarkable coincidence or deliberate selection processes that identify individuals whose powers align with the kinds of strategic capabilities the world government requires for maintaining its global authority through the implicit threat of unstoppable retaliation. against any challenge to its supremacy. Admiral Kizaru's mastery of light-based powers demonstrates how seemingly simple concepts can become terrifyingly complex when wielded by someone whose understanding of their capabilities has been refined through decades of combat experience against opponents who represent the strongest forces their era could produce. His ability to move at the speed of light transforms every engagement into a contest where normal concepts of strategy and tactics become irrelevant, his presence reducing complex military situations to the simple question of whether his opponents can survive long enough to mount any meaningful resistance against someone who can strike from any direction at any moment. The psychological impact of facing an opponent whose attacks arrive faster than human nervous systems can process extends far beyond the immediate tactical disadvantages such speed creates, introducing elements of hopelessness and despair that can break enemy morale before combat actually begins. Pirates who have spent years building reputations for courage and determination find themselves reduced to terrified flight when confronted with abilities that make their own considerable powers seem laughably inadequate, their confidence shattered by encounters with forces that operate according to principles beyond their comprehension or capacity to counter. Admiral Aokiji's control over ice and cold represents a different approach to overwhelming power, his abilities allowing him to reshape entire battlefields while providing both offensive and defensive capabilities that can neutralize threats through methods ranging from direct combat to environmental manipulation that makes continued resistance impossible. His philosophical commitment to lazy justice reflects the kind of moral complexity that characterizes many admiral-level officers, individuals whose exposure to the full scope of the world government's activities has created sophisticated understanding of the ethical ambiguities inherent in wielding ultimate authority in service of imperfect institutions. The internal conflicts that drove Aokiji to eventually leave the Marines demonstrate how even the most powerful individuals can be destroyed by the contradictions inherent in serving an organization whose methods often contradict its stated principles. His departure, representing not just personal crisis but institutional failure to maintain the loyalty of someone whose capabilities were essentially irreplaceable. His transformation from dedicated Marine officer to wandering exile illustrates the psychological costs of wielding ultimate power in service of masters, whose own morality becomes increasingly questionable as one rises high enough to understand their true nature. Admiral Akainu's embodiment of absolute justice and his mastery of magma-based powers create a synergy between philosophical commitment and tactical capability that makes him perhaps the most feared figure in the entire Marine hierarchy. His unwillingness to accept any compromise or acknowledge any limitation, transforming him into an unstoppable force whose intervention in any conflict guarantees maximum destruction in pursuit of complete victory. His promotion to Fleet Admiral following the Marineford War represents the triumph of his uncompromising approach over more moderate alternatives, fundamentally altering the character of the entire Marine organization in ways whose full implications continue to unfold. The burden of serving as protectors of the celestial dragons forces admirals to confront the fundamental contradictions at the heart of the system they serve, requiring them to risk their lives defending individuals whose behavior often contradicts every principle that supposedly justifies Marine existence, while maintaining public facades that suggest such service represents the highest form of duty and honor. This obligation creates psychological stress that few individuals are equipped to handle, forcing admirals to develop sophisticated methods of compartmentalization that allow them to function effectively while suppressing awareness of the moral costs their service entails. The deployment of admirals in response to Yonko-level threats demonstrates both the extent of their capabilities and the limitations of even the world government's ultimate weapons. These confrontations revealing that there are forces in the world whose power approaches or exceeds what individual admirals can handle, while highlighting the political complexities that prevent the government from simply using overwhelming force to eliminate all challenges to its authority. The delicate balance that prevents these conflicts from escalating into world-ending warfare requires constant diplomatic and strategic maneuvering that constrains admiral actions in ways that pure military considerations would not justify. The personal philosophies that guide individual admiral actions reflect their attempts to create coherent moral frameworks within which they can operate while serving an organization whose demands often conflict with conventional ethical reasoning, each developing their own interpretation of justice that allows them to maintain psychological stability while wielding powers that could easily be turned toward destructive purposes. These philosophical differences create tensions within the admiral ranks that can influence strategic decisions and operational effectiveness, their disagreements sometimes spilling into conflicts that affect the entire marine organization. The loneliness that accompanies admiral-level power stems not just from their physical isolation from normal human experience, but from their unique position as individuals who possess both the capability to see the world, government's deepest flaws, and the power to potentially challenge the system they serve, creating internal conflicts between duty and conscience that cannot be resolved through conventional means. Their awareness of secrets that are hidden from lower-ranking Marines combines with their first-hand experience of governmental corruption to create burdens that few individuals are psychologically equipped to bear without developing coping mechanisms that may compromise their effectiveness or moral integrity. The succession process that determines admiral appointments remains shrouded in secrecy, involving considerations that extend far beyond simple combat capability to encompass loyalty, philosophical compatibility with current governmental priorities, and political calculations about how different candidates might influence the balance of power within the Marine hierarchy. The world draft that occasionally identifies potential admiral candidates from outside the traditional Marine promotion system demonstrates the government's recognition that conventional training methods may not produce individuals with the rare combination of power, loyalty, and psychological stability necessary for effective service at the highest levels. The administrative responsibilities that accompany admiral rank often come as unwelcome surprises to individuals whose careers have focused primarily on combat effectiveness, requiring them to master bureaucratic and political skills that may be entirely foreign to their previous experience, while maintaining the combat readiness that justified their appointments. The tension between these different demands creates additional stress for officers who may have spent decades developing military expertise, only to discover that their new positions require capabilities they never developed and may not possess. The relationship between admirals and the 5 elder stars involves complex dynamics where military expertise must be balanced against political considerations that may override purely strategic reasoning, creating situations where admiral recommendations are ignored or modified in ways that compromise operational effectiveness, while serving broader governmental objectives that remain opaque to the officers who must implement, resulting policies. These interactions highlight the fundamental subordination of military authority to political control while demonstrating the challenges inherent in governing through institutions whose different purposes and priorities cannot always be harmonized. The historical evolution of admiral capabilities reflects both advances in combat techniques and changing strategic requirements, as the world government has adapted to new threats and opportunities over the centuries, each era producing admirals whose powers and philosophies align with the specific challenges their generation faces, while contributing to institutional knowledge that shapes future development. The legends that surround retired or deceased admirals serve as both inspiration and burden for current officers, creating expectations that may be impossible to fulfill, while providing examples of how ultimate power can be wielded for both constructive and destructive purposes. The psychological profiles that characterize successful admiral candidates reveal common traits that include not just exceptional combat ability, but the kind of mental resilience necessary to maintain functionality while operating under constant pressure from multiple sources, their decisions affecting millions of lives while being subject to criticism from superiors who may not fully understand the constraints under which they operate. The selection process that identifies these individuals must balance competing demands for loyalty, effectiveness, and psychological stability, while recognizing that the qualities that make someone an excellent admiral may also make them potentially dangerous if their loyalty to the system ever wavers. The impact of admiral actions on global politics extends far beyond immediate military consequences to include effects on public perception of governmental authority, international relations between member kingdoms, and the overall stability of systems that depend on the credible threat of overwhelming retaliation against challenges to the established order. Each admiral deployment sends messages that influence the calculations of potential enemies and allies alike, their mere existence serving as deterrent against actions that might otherwise seem attractive to those who lack full appreciation for the consequences of provoking governmental response. The burden of being humanity's ultimate protectors creates expectations that no individual can fully satisfy, requiring admirals to maintain public personas that may diverge significantly from their private understanding of their own limitations and the constraints under which they operate, while serving masters whose own commitments to the private understanding, principles they claim to uphold, may be suspect. The recognition that they are simultaneously the greatest defenders of civilization and potentially its greatest threats creates psychological tensions that must be carefully managed to prevent the kind of breakdown that could transform protectors into destroyers. As we observe these titans who stride across the world's stage like living forces of nature, we witness the ultimate expression of the world government's authority made manifest in individuals whose power approaches the divine, while their humanity remains trapped within systems that demand perfection from those who are fundamentally flawed. The tragedy of the admirals lies not in any failure of personal virtue, but in their transformation into instruments of a system whose true nature becomes more apparent the higher one rises within its hierarchy, their godlike powers ultimately serving masters, whose own claims to divine authority rest on foundations of carefully hidden lies and systematic oppression of the very people these ultimate protectors have sworn to defend. The shadow organizations that operate under the Cipher Pole designation represent the world government's acknowledgement that maintaining global dominance requires capabilities that extend far beyond what conventional military forces can provide, their very existence serving as testament to the recognition that some threats to systemic stability can only be addressed through methods that must never be publicly acknowledged or officially sanctioned. These elite operatives move through the world like phantoms, their identities carefully constructed facades that conceal years of training designed to transform ordinary human beings into living weapons, whose primary allegiance transcends personal relationships, national loyalties, or conventional moral constraints in service of preserving an order that most of them have never been permitted to fully understand. The evolution of the Cypher-Pol system from its earliest incarnations to the current structure reflects centuries of accumulated experience in the arts of espionage, assassination, and information warfare, each iteration building upon lessons learned from previous operations while adapting to changing technological capabilities and evolving threats to governmental authority. The numerical designations that distinguish different Cypher-Pol divisions indicate not just organizational hierarchy but specialization in different aspects of covert operations, from basic intelligence gathering and surveillance to the most extreme forms of elimination and social control that the world government employs when subtler methods prove insufficient for addressing challenges to its continued supremacy. Cypher-Pol 1 through 8 represent the backbone of the government's intelligence apparatus, their operatives embedded throughout the world's power structures where they monitor political developments, economic trends, and social movements that might eventually pose threats to the established order, while simultaneously influencing these same phenomena through carefully targeted interventions designed to guide events toward outcomes that serve the government's broader strategic objectives. These agents often spend years or even decades maintaining cover identities, their real personalities gradually subsumed by the roles they play, while their handlers in Marie-Joie receive regular reports that enable them to anticipate and counter potential challenges before they can develop into serious problems. The psychological toll of maintaining false identities for extended periods transforms Cypher-Pol operatives into individuals whose relationship with their own humanity becomes increasingly tenuous, their authentic selves buried beneath layers of constructed personality that may eventually become more real than the original person who first accepted recruitment into this shadow world. The training programs that prepare agents for such long-term infiltration missions include psychological conditioning, designed to suppress emotional attachments that might compromise operational effectiveness. Yet this same conditioning often creates individuals who are incapable of forming genuine human connections even when their missions are complete. Cypher-Pol 9 achieved legendary status within intelligence circles through their mastery of the Rokushiki fighting techniques, 6 superhuman abilities that transform the human body into a weapon capable of matching and exceeding the combat effectiveness of many devil fruit users, while maintaining the flexibility and unpredictability that comes from not being dependent on a single supernatural power source. The development of these techniques represents generations of accumulated martial arts knowledge, refined through countless combat encounters and systematic analysis of human physical potential, their mastery requiring dedication that borders on obsession, combined with natural talent that few individuals possess. The Water 7 operation conducted by Cypher-Pol 9 demonstrates both the capabilities and limitations of even the most elite covert operatives when they are forced to abandon their preferred methods of operating from shadows and engage in direct confrontation with opponents who possess comparable strength, combined with moral certainty about the righteousness of their cause. The years-long infiltration of Galileo Company required unprecedented commitment to maintaining false identities while slowly gathering intelligence about the location of Pluton's blueprints. Their success in this mission, representing a masterpiece of patient intelligence work that was ultimately compromised by factors beyond their control. Rob Lucci's transformation from government assassin to reluctant revolutionary illustrates the complex psychological dynamics that can emerge when individuals who have been trained to suppress their humanity recount situations that force them to confront the moral implications of their actions. His evolution from cold-blooded killer to someone capable of questioning orders representing both personal growth and institutional failure on the part of the system that created him. His mastery of the Rokushiki techniques combined with his Zoan devil fruit powers made him one of the most dangerous individuals in government service. Yet his eventual departure from Cypher Pol 9 suggests that even the most successful conditioning programs cannot entirely eliminate the human capacity for moral reasoning. The development of Rokushiki techniques requires practitioners to push their physical capabilities beyond normal human limitations through training regimens that would kill most people who attempted them, their bodies gradually adapting to stresses that fundamentally alter their physiological capabilities, while their minds learn to process combat information at speeds that allow them to react to attacks that normal humans could never even perceive. Soru enables movement at velocities that create afterimages, while Geppo allows practitioners to literally walk on air. These abilities representing mastery over physical laws that most people consider immutable constraints. Tekkai transforms the human body into something approaching living armor through muscle control techniques that can deflect attacks capable of shattering stone, while Shigen focuses this same principle into concentrated strikes that can penetrate virtually any defense through the application of finger techniques that operate like bullets fired from invisible weapons. Rankyaku extends this concept to create slashing attacks through leg movements that generate cutting waves capable of slicing through buildings, while Kamiye allows practitioners to become virtually untouchable through paper-like flexibility that enables them to flow around attacks rather than simply avoiding or blocking them. The philosophical implications of mastering techniques that transcend normal human limitations extend beyond simple combat effectiveness to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of human potential and the prices that must be paid to unlock capabilities that most people never realize they possess. The practitioners of Rokushiki becoming living examples of what dedication and sacrifice can achieve, while simultaneously demonstrating the isolation that accompanies such transcendence of ordinary limitations. Their abilities set them apart from normal humanity in ways that create psychological barriers as formidable as their physical capabilities. Their enhanced powers coming at the cost of their ability to relate to people who have not undergone similar transformations. The recruitment process that identifies potential Cypher Pol operatives remains shrouded in secrecy, involving psychological profiling and capability assessment that extends far beyond what conventional military organizations employ when selecting personnel for sensitive assignments. The government's intelligence services requiring individuals whose combination of skills, loyalty, and moral flexibility cannot be found through normal channels or developed through standard training programs. The children who are purchased from various sources and raised within government facilities represent the most extreme expression of this approach, their entire development carefully controlled to produce agents whose loyalty to the system is absolute, because they have never known any alternative. Cypher Pol Zero emerged as the ultimate expression of the world government's intelligence capabilities, their operatives drawn from the most successful members of lower-numbered divisions, while being granted direct access to the celestial dragons and the authority to act on their behalf without requiring approval from intermediary authorities. This elevation in status and responsibility marking them as the most trusted and dangerous individuals in government service. Their white masks and formal uniforms serve as symbols of their transcendence of normal governmental hierarchy, while concealing identities that must remain secret even from other government personnel who lack the security clearances necessary to know their true names or backgrounds. The relationship between Cypher Pol Zero and the Celestial Dragons creates opportunities for abuse that extend far beyond what even the most corrupt conventional government officials might attempt. their missions often involving activities that serve the personal whims and sadistic entertainment preferences of world nobles, rather than legitimate security concerns, transforming elite government operatives into private servants whose capabilities are wasted on tasks that contribute nothing to systemic stability, while potentially creating new sources of instability through their excesses. The psychological impact on agents who must carry out such assignments while maintaining their professional competence and personal sanity represents one of the most challenging aspects of service. At the highest levels of the intelligence hierarchy, the training facilities where Cypherpol operatives develop their capabilities exist in locations that do not appear on any official maps, their existence known only to those who have direct involvement in the intelligence apparatus, while their methods remain classified at levels that prevent even high-ranking military officers from understanding how the government produces individuals with such extraordinary capabilities. The instructors who guide this training are themselves products of the system they perpetuate, their own experiences having convinced them that the sacrifices required to create effective agents are justified by the importance of maintaining global stability through whatever means prove necessary. The psychological conditioning that transforms recruits into effective operatives involves systematic destruction of normal human emotional responses, combined with reconstruction of personality around core loyalties that supersede personal relationships, individual moral reasoning, and self-preservation instincts that might interfere with mission completion. This process creating individuals who are supremely effective within their designated roles, while being fundamentally damaged in ways that may never be fully healed. The techniques employed in this conditioning represent centuries of accumulated knowledge about human psychology, applied with scientific precision to achieve specific behavioral outcomes, regardless of the personal costs to the subjects involved. The moral complexity that characterizes Cypherpol operations stems from the disconnect between the noble principles that supposedly justify their existence and the brutal methods they employ to achieve objectives that may serve systemic stability while creating immense suffering for individuals who become targets of their activities, their agents often finding themselves protecting an order that they have been deliberately prevented from fully understanding, while eliminating threats that may represent legitimate grievances against systematic injustice. The compartmentalization that prevents operatives from seeing the broader context of their missions serves operational security requirements, while also protecting them from awareness that might compromise their effectiveness or psychological stability. The technology and resources available to Cypherpol operatives reflect the world government's recognition that intelligence operations require capabilities that extend far beyond what individual skill and training can provide. Their access to advanced communication systems, transportation networks, and fabricated identities, enabling them to operate across the globe while maintaining coordination with handlers who may be thousands of miles away from their operational areas. The financial resources that support these operations represent significant investments in maintaining capabilities that most government officials never see direct evidence of, but whose effects influence major political and economic developments throughout the world. The relationship between different Cypherpol divisions creates internal competition and cooperation that can enhance overall effectiveness, while also generating conflicts that may compromise operational security or mission success. Agents from different organizations sometimes working at cross purposes while pursuing objectives that their respective handlers believe serve the government's best interests, but which may actually conflict with each other in ways that create unintended consequences. The lack of complete coordination between intelligence divisions reflects the complexity of managing global operations while maintaining operational security that prevents any single compromise from exposing the entire system. The long-term impact of Cypherpol operations on global political development extends far beyond the immediate results of individual missions to encompass effects on social movements, economic systems, and cultural evolution that may not become apparent for years or decades after the original interventions occurred, their influence shaping the world in ways that most people never recognize, while creating conditions that serve the world government's interests through mechanisms that remain invisible to outside observation. The agents who carry out these missions rarely understand the full scope of their contributions to this larger process, their individual actions serving purposes that transcend their personal knowledge or approval. The corruption that can develop within intelligence organizations when oversight becomes inadequate, or when operational necessities are used to justify activities that serve personal rather than institutional interests, represents one of the greatest threats to the effectiveness of the entire Cypherpol system. The same capabilities that make these operatives valuable assets for legitimate government purposes, also making them dangerous when their loyalty shifts, or when they begin using their skills for unauthorized purposes. The mechanisms that exist for detecting and eliminating such corruption must themselves operate in secrecy, creating additional layers of complexity and potential for abuse within systems that are already problematic from moral and practical perspectives. The human cost of maintaining intelligence capabilities that operate beyond conventional moral and legal constraints accumulates over time in ways that affect not just the operatives who carry out missions, but the broader governmental systems that depend on their services. The psychological damage inflicted on agents eventually manifesting as institutional pathologies that corrupt decision-making processes and create cycles of violence that become self-perpetuating even when they no longer serve legitimate security purposes. The recognition that such costs are inevitable consequences of operating in shadows does not diminish their significance or justify the suffering they create among individuals who never chose to participate in conflicts. They may not even understand. The warlord system represents perhaps the most morally compromised institution ever devised by the world government, a deliberate decision to legitimize piracy in service of maintaining the delicate balance of power that prevented the world from descending into chaos while simultaneously corrupting the very principles of justice that supposedly justified governmental authority in the first place. This arrangement transformed some of history's most notorious criminals into official agents of the state, granting them legal immunity for past crimes, while providing them with resources and protection to continue activities that would have warranted execution if performed by anyone lacking their unique combination of power and strategic value to the established order. The conceptual foundation of the Seven Warlords of the Sea emerged from centuries of strategic thinking about how to manage threats that were too powerful to eliminate through conventional military action, but too dangerous to ignore. Their creators recognizing that some pirates had achieved levels of strength and influence that made direct confrontation potentially catastrophic for all parties involved. The solution they developed represented a masterpiece of political cynicism disguised as pragmatic necessity, transforming enemies into allies through agreements that served everyone's immediate interests, while creating long-term problems that would eventually threaten the stability of the entire system. The selection process for warlord appointments involved complex calculations that balanced individual combat capabilities against territorial control, crew strength, and political reliability. Each candidate's suitability being evaluated not just for their ability to serve governmental interests, but for their potential to cause problems if their loyalty ever wavered, or if circumstances changed in ways that made their continued cooperation disadvantageous. The world government's willingness to overlook virtually any crime in exchange for future service demonstrated the extent to which practical considerations had superseded moral principles in their approach to maintaining global dominance. The legal immunities granted to warlords extended far beyond simple pardons for past offenses to encompass ongoing protection from prosecution for activities that would normally warrant immediate military intervention. Their official status as government agents providing them with diplomatic cover that allowed them to operate with impunity while technically serving the state's interests. This arrangement created situations where Marine officers were forbidden from taking action against individuals whose behavior violated everything the Marines supposedly stood for, forcing them to watch helplessly as officially sanctioned pirates committed atrocities that contradicted the organization's fundamental mission. Sir Crocodile's infiltration and attempted conquest of Alabaster Kingdom demonstrates the inevitable consequences of granting criminals the authority and resources of the state while expecting their personal ambitions to remain subordinate to governmental interests. His use of Baroque works to orchestrate a civil war that would have destroyed an entire civilization, illustrating how warlord status could be weaponized against the very people it was supposed to protect. The years of preparation required for his scheme revealed both the patience that characterized the most dangerous pirates and the systematic intelligence failures that allowed such plots to develop undetected by government oversight. Mechanisms. The relationship between Crocodile and the world government during his tenure as a warlord created a paradox where official agents were simultaneously protecting and investigating someone whose loyalty was always questionable at best. The complexity of managing such relationships requiring diplomatic skills that few government officials possessed while creating opportunities for manipulation that Crocodile exploited with masterful precision. His ability to maintain his position for years while actively working against government interests demonstrates both the inadequacy of warlord oversight mechanisms and the seductive appeal of believing that former enemies could be transformed into reliable allies through the simple expedient of offering them legitimate authority. Don Quixote do Flamingo's transformation from celestial dragon to pirate to warlord and back to criminal represents the ultimate expression of the system's fundamental contradictions. His unique background, providing him with insights into government operations that he used to create a criminal empire that existed simultaneously within and outside the legal framework that was supposed to constrain his activities. His mastery of blackmail and information warfare enabled him to maintain his warlord status even after his activities became impossible to ignore. His threats to reveal government secrets providing him with leverage that made direct action against him potentially catastrophic for the world government's reputation and operational security. The underground network that Doflamingo constructed during his years as a warlord demonstrates how official government sanction could be used to facilitate criminal activities on a scale that would have been impossible without such legitimacy. His auction houses and arms-dealing operations, serving clients throughout the world while being protected by the very authority he was systematically undermining through his actions. The psychological profile of someone capable of such sustained deception while maintaining the facade of government service reveals depths of sociopathy that the warlord's selection process was apparently incapable of identifying or unwilling to acknowledge. Bartholomew Kuma's tragic transformation from Revolutionary Army officer to mindless cyborg serves as perhaps the most disturbing example of how warlord status could be used to facilitate government programs that violated every principle of human dignity and individual autonomy. His gradual replacement with mechanical systems that erased his personality and free will, representing the ultimate triumph of state interests over personal identity. The scientific expertise required to perform such modifications while maintaining his combat effectiveness demonstrates capabilities that raise troubling questions about what other experiments the world government might be conducting on individuals whose circumstances make them vulnerable to such exploitation. The psychological impact on Kuma's former associates, who were forced to watch his systematic dehumanization while being powerless to prevent or reverse the process, illustrates how the warlord system created suffering that extended far beyond its direct participants to encompass everyone who had personal relationships with those who became trapped within its mechanisms. The knowledge that someone they had fought alongside and trusted with their lives was being slowly murdered and replaced with a government-controlled automaton represents a form of psychological torture that may have been deliberately designed to discourage future resistance to government authority. Boa Hancock's appointment as a warlord, despite her consistent refusal to cooperate with government requests or participate in official activities, demonstrates how the system could be corrupted by factors that had nothing to do with strategic necessity or operational effectiveness. Her protection of Amazon Lily being purchased through an arrangement that served her interests while providing the government with minimal benefits in return. Her ability to maintain her position despite open hostility toward government officials reveals the extent to which the warlord system had become a tool for managing political relationships rather than enhancing military capabilities. The relationship between Hancock and her subjects on Amazon Lily creates additional complexity around the legitimacy of her warlord status, as her decisions about cooperation with government requests affected not just her own welfare but the safety and autonomy of an entire civilization that had chosen isolation from the outside world precisely to avoid the kinds of entanglements that her position created. The moral burden of making choices that could expose her people to government retaliation while balancing their safety against her personal principles demonstrates the impossible situations that warlord status could create for individuals who retained some degree of conscience. Dracul Mihawk's complete indifference to government politics and his treatment of warlord status as nothing more than a convenience that allowed him to pursue his personal interests without interference from Marine forces represents perhaps the most honest approach to the arrangement, his refusal to pretend that he served any interests beyond his own, eliminating the hypocrisy that characterized most warlord relationships, while highlighting the fundamental emptiness of claims that such appointments served legitimate government purpose. His willingness to abandon his position when it no longer provided benefits demonstrates the transactional nature of loyalties that were never based on shared principles or common cause. The impact of Mihawk's presence on the global balance of power extended far beyond his individual combat capabilities to encompass the psychological effect his reputation had on other pirates who might otherwise have challenged government authority, his very existence serving as proof that some individuals possessed power that transcended normal political categories, while his apparent contentment with his warlord status suggested that cooperation with the government might be preferable to the alternatives available to those who chose outright rebellion. Marshall teaches infiltration of the warlord system as part of his larger strategy for achieving emperor status, demonstrates how the appointment process could be manipulated by individuals whose long-term objectives were fundamentally incompatible with government interests. His brief tenure as Blackbeard revealing both the inadequacy of background investigation procedures and the seductive appeal of recruiting individuals whose power was obviously increasing rapidly, regardless of their ultimate loyalties. His use of warlord resources to attack Impel Down and recruit additional crew members from among the most dangerous criminals in government custody represents perhaps the most spectacular example of how the system could be turned against its creators. The philosophical implications of legitimizing piracy through government sanction extend beyond immediate practical concerns to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of law, order, and moral authority in societies that claim to operate according to principles of justice and equality before legal institutions that are supposed to apply universal standards, rather than making exceptions based on political expedience or strategic necessity. The warlord system's existence as official government policy undermines claims about moral superiority that justify the world government's authority, while providing concrete evidence that practical power matters more than abstract principles in determining how laws are applied. The economic impact of warlord activities on global commerce and local populations created distortions that affected millions of people who had no voice in decisions about whether particular pirates should be granted official sanction for activities that destroyed their communities, disrupted their livelihoods, or threatened their safety. The costs of maintaining the balance of power being borne by those who derive no benefits from the arrangement, while being powerless to influence its continuation or modification. The tribute systems and protection rackets that some warlords established in their territories created parallel government structures that competed with official authorities while being protected by those same authorities. The intelligence value that warlords potentially provided through their connections to criminal networks and their knowledge of pirate activities was often compromised by the same factors that made them valuable sources of information. Their own involvement in illegal activities creating conflicts of interest that made their reports unreliable, while their positions within the system gave them incentives to manipulate intelligence in ways that served their personal interests rather than government needs. The challenge of verifying information provided by sources whose motivations were inherently suspect created additional layers of complexity for intelligence analysts who were already dealing with incomplete and contradictory data about criminal activities. The dissolution of the warlord system following revelations about the extent of abuse and corruption within the program represents both an acknowledgement of its fundamental failures and an attempt to address public criticism that had made its continuation politically untenable. Yet, the replacement of human warlords with cybernetic seraphim suggests that the underlying strategic thinking that created the original system remains unchanged, even as its implementation has been modified to address specific problems that made the previous arrangement unsustainable. The Seraphim program represents an attempt to capture the military benefits of the warlord system while eliminating the loyalty and reliability problems that characterized relationships with human pirates, their artificial nature theoretically providing perfect obedience to government commands, while their combat capabilities are designed to match or exceed those of the individuals they replace. However, the technological complexity required to create such beings raises questions about resource allocation and long-term sustainability. While the philosophical implications of replacing human agents with artificial constructs reveal the government's fundamental distrust of human nature and preference for control over cooperation, the legacy of the warlord system continues to influence global politics through the precedents it established about the world government's willingness to compromise its stated principles when doing so serves strategic objectives, creating expectations among other potential allies and enemies about how future negotiations might proceed, while undermining the moral authority that legitimate governments derive from consistent application of legal and ethical standards. The memory of officially sanctioned pirates who committed atrocities while being protected by government authority will influence public perception of government legitimacy for generations to come. As we reflect upon this systematic corruption of justice in service of political expediency, we witness the inevitable consequences of prioritizing short-term stability over long-term legitimacy. The world government's willingness to embrace criminals as agents revealing the fundamental moral bankruptcy that characterizes institutions whose claims to authority rest not on popular consent or ethical superiority, but on the simple ability to deploy overwhelming force against those who refuse to accept their dominance, their partnership with pirates serving as metaphor for the corrupt bargains that sustain all forms of tyrannical rule. The celestial dragons stand as living monuments to the corruption of absolute power, their very existence serving as proof that 8 centuries of unchallenged authority can transform ordinary human beings into creatures so divorced from normal humanity that they consider themselves a separate species entirely, their every breath a testament to the poisonous effects of inherited privilege that has never been tempered by consequence or constrained by accountability. These descendants of the 20 kings who founded the world government have evolved beyond mere aristocracy into something approaching a caricature of divine authority, their lives structured around the fundamental assumption that the rest of humanity exists solely to serve their whims and satisfy their increasingly elaborate desires for entertainment and validation. The transformation from royal bloodlines to self-proclaimed gods represents one of history's most complete examples of how power corrupts not just individuals, but entire family lines. Across generations, each successive cohort of world nobles being raised with fewer constraints and less contact with reality than their predecessors, until the very concept of limitation becomes foreign to their understanding of how the world operates. The children born into this rarefied atmosphere never experience genuine hardship, meaningful challenge, or authentic relationship with anyone whose status approaches equality with their own. Their psychological development occurring within an environment so artificial that normal human emotional and social skills never have opportunity to develop properly. The bubble helmets that celestial dragons wear whenever they venture beyond the sacred land of Mariéchois serve as perfect metaphors for their complete isolation from the world they claim to rule, their refusal to breathe the same air as ordinary humans, reflecting a level of contempt for their subjects that transcends normal categories of prejudice or discrimination to become something approaching pathological disgust. This physical barrier between themselves and the rest of humanity creates a psychological distance that makes empathy impossible, while reinforcing their conviction that they represent a fundamentally superior form of life that should never be contaminated by contact with lesser beings. The daily routine of life within Mariéchois revolves around elaborate ceremonies and entertainments designed to occupy minds that have never been required to engage with genuine challenges or meaningful responsibilities. Their days filled with activities that would seem absurd to anyone whose existence includes actual consequences for their actions. The consumption of exotic foods prepared by slaves, the acquisition of rare objects obtained through methods they prefer not to examine, and the staging of elaborate spectacles that exist solely for their amusement, create an atmosphere where reality becomes indistinguishable from performance, and authentic experience becomes impossible to achieve. The slavery that forms the economic foundation of celestial dragon society represents the logical extreme of viewing other human beings as property rather than people, their casual ownership of human lives, reflecting not just moral blindness but complete inability to recognize that their slaves possess inner lives, emotional needs, or legitimate desires for freedom and dignity. The human auction houses where they shop for new acquisitions operate with the same casual atmosphere as markets for livestock, their bidding wars over particular individuals treating questions of human worth as matters of aesthetic preference rather than moral consideration. St. Charlos embodies perhaps the most extreme expression of celestial dragon psychology, his treatment of other people revealing depths of sadism and casual cruelty that would be considered pathological in anyone who lacked the protection of his inherited status. His actions demonstrating how absolute power, combined with complete lack of accountability, can produce individuals whose capacity for causing suffering appears to be limited only by their imagination and the resources available to implement their fantasies. His decision to shoot Hutchin for the crime of existing in his presence represents not aberrant behavior, but standard operating procedure for someone who has never learned that other people's lives have value independent of their utility to him. The entertainment preferences that characterize world noble culture reveal minds that have been so thoroughly corrupted by unchecked power that normal forms of amusement no longer provide adequate stimulation, their need for increasingly extreme spectacles driving them to devise forms of cruelty that serve no purpose, beyond satisfying their desire to witness suffering that they have personally caused. The gladiatorial contests, the hunting of human prey, and the elaborate tortures that they devise for slaves who displease them reflect not just moral bankruptcy but psychological pathology that has been enabled and encouraged by systems designed to satisfy their every whim regardless of the cost to others. The marriage customs that govern celestial dragon reproduction prioritize bloodline purity above all other considerations. Their obsession with maintaining genetic superiority, leading to practices that would be considered barbaric in any other context, while creating additional barriers to the development of normal human relationships or authentic emotional connections. The children produced by these arranged unions inherit not just wealth and status, but psychological damage that manifests as inability to form genuine attachments to other people. Their emotional development stunted by early exposure to power that makes normal human interaction impossible. The few instances of world nobles who have attempted to break from the traditional patterns of their class provide insight into both the possibility of redemption and the enormous obstacles that prevent such transformation from occurring. More frequently, their struggles to develop conscience and empathy, demonstrating how thoroughly the system is designed to prevent the emergence of moral reasoning that might threaten its continuation. Don Quixote Homing's attempt to live as an ordinary human resulted not in acceptance or integration, but in tragic consequences that reinforce the barriers between celestial dragons and the rest of humanity, while providing lessons about the dangers of abandoning inherited privilege. The protection protocols that surround World Noble movement create elaborate security arrangements that involve hundreds of government personnel whose lives become subordinate to ensuring that no harm comes to individuals whose own actions regularly cause immense suffering to others. The irony of using the lives of genuinely valuable people to protect those whose continued existence contributes nothing positive to the world being lost on systems that prioritize status over merit. The admiral-level response to any threat against a celestial dragon demonstrates the extent to which the entire government apparatus has been corrupted by the need to maintain the fiction that these individuals deserve the reverence they demand. The economic impact of supporting celestial dragon lifestyles extends far beyond the direct costs of their consumption to encompass the systematic distortion of global resource allocation that occurs when unlimited wealth is concentrated in the hands of individuals whose spending decisions are motivated by caprice rather than any rational assessment of value or social benefit, their purchases driving markets in directions that serve no purpose beyond satisfying whims that may change without notice or reason. The tribute system that funds their extravagances represents wealth extracted from populations who struggle to meet basic needs, while being told that such sacrifice is necessary to maintain the peace and order that justifies the entire system. The psychological profile of individuals raised from birth to consider themselves divine reveals the inevitable consequences of removing all external constraints on human behavior, while providing unlimited resources for implementing whatever desires emerge from minds that have never been required to consider the welfare of others or the long-term consequences of their actions. The narcissism that characterizes celestial dragon personality development represents not individual pathology, but the predictable result of environmental factors that make healthy psychological development impossible while rewarding the beta, most destructive impulses that normal socialization is designed to suppress. The relationship between individual world nobles and their personal servants creates microcosms of the broader power dynamics that define the entire world government system, their treatment of people who depend on their favor for survival, revealing the casual cruelty that emerges when one party possesses absolute power over another, while lacking any incentive to exercise that power responsibly. The servants who spend their lives catering to celestial dragon whims must develop sophisticated psychological defense mechanisms to maintain their sanity while remaining functional within systems that treat them as expendable resources, rather than human beings deserving of basic dignity and respect. The rare instances of genuine affection or attachment that occasionally develop between world nobles and their servants create additional complexity within relationships that are fundamentally defined by inequality and exploitation. These emotional connections serving as reminders of the humanity that exists beneath layers of conditioning and privilege, while simultaneously highlighting the impossibility of authentic relationship between individuals whose social positions make equality impossible to achieve. The tragedy of such relationships lies not just in their inherent instability, but in their demonstration of what might be possible if the system allowed for genuine human connection across class boundaries. The generational transmission of celestial dragon culture ensures that the psychological damage inflicted by absolute power perpetuates itself across centuries, each new cohort of world nobles inheriting not just wealth and status, but the accumulated trauma and moral blindness that characterizes their entire class, their education and social environment carefully designed to prevent the development of empathy or moral reasoning that might lead them to question the system that privileges them at the expense of billions of other people whose suffering they have been trained to ignore or dismiss as irrelevant to their concerns. The intersection between celestial dragon psychology and broader governmental policy creates situations where personal whims and petty grievances can influence decisions that affect millions of lives. Their casual requests for particular islands to be destroyed or specific individuals to be eliminated, being treated as legitimate government priorities that warrant the deployment of massive resources and personnel. The transformation of individual caprice into state policy, representing perhaps the most dangerous aspect of a system that grants unlimited authority to individuals whose judgment has been corrupted by lifetimes of unchallenged power. The theological implications of celestial dragon claims to divine status reveal the extent to which the world government system depends on supernatural justifications for arrangements that would be considered illegitimate if evaluated according to rational or democratic principles. Their assertion that they represent gods walking among mortals, serving to transform political and economic domination into religious obligation that ordinary people are expected to accept as natural law rather than human creation that could be modified or eliminated through collective action. The isolation that characterizes celestial dragon existence creates a psychological prison, as confining as any physical barrier, their separation from authentic human experience, leaving them incapable of understanding the very world they claim to rule. while their inability to form genuine relationships condemns them to lives of profound loneliness disguised as social dominance. The tragedy of their existence lies not in any sympathy they might deserve, but in their transformation into living symbols of everything that is wrong with systems that prioritize power over humanity, their very presence serving as reminder that unchecked authority inevitably produces monsters who consider themselves gods while behaving like demons. The broader implications of celestial dragon existence for global civilization extend beyond their direct actions to encompass the example they provide of what humanity becomes when freed from all moral constraints while being granted unlimited power over others, their lives serving as cautionary tales about the inevitable corruption that accompanies absolute authority, while demonstrating why no individual or group should ever be permitted to wield power without accountability to those who are affected by their decisions. The 5 elder stars stand at the apex of visible governmental authority, their ancient faces bearing witness to centuries of accumulated secrets, while their eyes reflect the terrible burden of knowledge that ordinary mortals were never meant to possess. These 5 figures represent the ultimate expression of political power within the world government hierarchy, their decisions rippling across the globe to affect the lives of billions, while their true identities remain shrouded in mystery that extends beyond simple operational security to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of their existence and the source of their authority to shape the destiny of human civilization itself. The longevity that characterizes the Gorosei raises troubling questions about whether these individuals represent normal human beings who have somehow extended their natural lifespans, or something far more disturbing, entities whose very nature transcends mortal limitations while their accumulated experience spans periods that dwarf the entirety of recorded history for most civilizations. The possibility that they have witnessed firsthand the events of the Void Century and the establishment of the world government creates implications that extend far beyond mere political authority to encompass direct culpability for 8 centuries of systematic oppression and historical manipulation. J. Garcia Saturn's mastery over scientific development and his oversight of the government's technological advancement programs position him as guardian of knowledge that could revolutionize human civilization if properly applied, yet his role in suppressing innovations that might threaten governmental control demonstrates the extent to which scientific progress has been subordinated to political stability. His understanding of ancient technologies that once enabled global civilization to achieve heights that modern science can barely comprehend makes his participation in maintaining technological regression a crime against human potential that affects every generation forced to live with limitations that need not exist. The weight of decisions about which scientific developments should be allowed to flourish and which must be suppressed creates moral burdens that few individuals could bear without experiencing profound psychological damage. Yet Saturn's apparent stability suggests either inhuman detachment from the consequences of his choices or psychological compartmentalization so complete that he has lost touch with normal human emotional responses to suffering. His management of the government's most sensitive research programs includes oversight of projects that treat human beings as expendable resources in pursuit of capabilities that serve institutional interests rather than human welfare. Ethan Baron Nushuro's responsibility for governmental finance and economic policy grants him authority over resource allocation that determines whether entire populations prosper or suffer. His decisions about tribute level trade regulations, and monetary policy, creating ripple effects that influence the daily lives of people who will never know his name while being powerless to influence the choices he makes on their behalf. The concentration of such economic authority in the hands of an individual whose accountability to those affected by his decisions remains non-existent represents one of the most dangerous aspects of the entire governmental system. The complexity of managing a global economy that encompasses hundreds of diverse kingdoms while maintaining the resource flows necessary to support the extravagant lifestyles of the celestial dragons requires capabilities that extend far beyond normal economic expertise to encompass political manipulation, strategic thinking, and moral flexibility that allows for the implementation of policies that may benefit the system while imposing enormous costs on populations whose welfare becomes secondary to systemic stability. The psychological profile required for such decision-making suggests either complete absence of empathy or the development of sophisticated rationalization mechanisms that transform suffering into statistical abstractions. Shepard Jew Peters' oversight of legal affairs and judicial policy positions him as architect of justice systems that operate according to principles that serve governmental interests rather than universal concepts of fairness or individual rights. His influence, extending to every court proceeding and legal interpretation that affects people throughout the world government's sphere of influence. The corruption of legal institutions under his guidance transforms law from a tool for protecting the innocent into a weapon for suppressing dissent, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate judicial processes. The establishment of predetermined guilt procedures at Enies Lobby and the systematic elimination of legal protections for anyone accused of crimes against the state represent the logical culmination of legal philosophy that prioritizes order over justice while treating individual rights as obstacles to effective governance that must be minimized or eliminated entirely. The psychological burden of creating and maintaining systems that guarantee injustice while claiming moral authority requires a level of self-deception or conscious evil that speaks to fundamental corruption of whatever human qualities these individuals may once have possessed. Marcus Mars's control over environmental and territorial matters grants him authority over policies that determine which populations have access to habitable land and natural resources. His decisions about environmental protection, territorial boundaries, and resource extraction rights, creating winners and losers on scales that affect entire civilizations, while being made according to criteria that prioritize governmental interests over environmental sustainability or human welfare. The power to determine which islands receive protection and which are abandoned to environmental degradation or deliberate destruction represents authority over life and death that extends across entire ecosystems. The knowledge that certain islands can be eliminated through ancient weapons, while maintaining plausible deniability about the causes of their destruction, creates opportunities for population control and territorial management that operate outside normal political processes while serving strategic objectives that may have nothing to do with legitimate governmental functions. The casual discussion of such possibilities during Gorosei meetings suggests a level of moral detachment that treats mass extinction events as acceptable policy tools rather than ultimate expressions of evil that should be inconceivable to anyone retaining human conscience. Topman Walkuri's responsibility for legal enforcement and internal security operations positions him as overseer of the intelligence apparatus and military forces that maintain governmental control through methods that range from surveillance and intimidation to assassination and mass destruction. his authority extending to decisions about when populations require pacification and which individuals pose sufficient threats to warrant elimination. The coordination of marine operations, Cypherpol activities, and admiral deployments under his guidance creates a unified security apparatus capable of suppressing any challenge to established authority while maintaining the fiction that such actions serve legitimate security purposes. The philosophical framework that guides decisions about when violence is justified and what levels of destruction are acceptable in pursuit of stability requires moral reasoning that either operates according to principles completely divorced from normal human values or represents the systematic corruption of conscience through exposure to power that makes normal ethical considerations seem irrelevant compared to institutional preservation. The ability to authorize actions that result in massive civilian casualties while maintaining personal psychological stability suggests either complete absence of normal human emotional responses or the development of rationalization, mechanisms so sophisticated that they transform atrocities into administrative décision. The decision-making process that governs Gorosei deliberations remains hidden from outside observation, yet fragments of evidence suggest collective responsibility for choices that individual members might never make alone. The group dynamic, enabling each participant to diffuse personal accountability while participating in decisions whose consequences they might find personally unacceptable, if required to bear sole responsibility for their implementation. The psychology of group decision-making, in contexts where normal moral constraints have been eliminated, creates possibilities for collective evil that exceed what any individual member might achieve independently. The relationship between the 5 elder stars and the broader celestial dragon population creates complex dynamics where the Gorosei must balance their responsibilities for global governance against their obligations to maintain the privileged positions of world nobles whose behavior often contradicts the stability that effective rule requires. Their management of these competing demands requiring diplomatic skills that enable them to satisfy impossible masters while maintaining operational effectiveness across governmental institutions whose purposes may conflict with celestial dragon whims. The burden of maintaining 8 centuries of accumulated lies while making decisions about current policy creates psychological stresses that few individuals could endure without developing severe mental pathology. Yet the apparent functionality of the Gorosei suggests either superhuman psychological resilience or the complete suppression of moral faculties that would normally create unbearable conflicts between public duties and private conscience. The possibility that they have transcended normal human psychological limitations through artificial means raises additional questions about their fundamental nature and the source of their apparent immunity to the corrosive effects of absolute power. The knowledge they possess about the true history of the Void Century and the circumstances surrounding the world government's establishment creates moral burdens that extend beyond personal guilt to encompass responsibility for maintaining systems built on foundations of deliberate historical distortion and mass murder. Their continued participation in such deception, making them active participants in ongoing crimes against human knowledge and collective memory that affect every person born into ignorance of their own history. The loneliness that accompanies ultimate authority becomes magnified when that authority extends across centuries and involves knowledge that cannot be shared with anyone outside their immediate circle, their isolation from normal human experience being complete, while their responsibilities for maintaining systems they may personally recognize as evil create internal conflicts that must somehow be resolved or suppressed to maintain Functionality. The price of such power may include the gradual loss of everything that makes existence meaningful while retaining the burden of making decisions that determine the fate of everyone else. The practical challenges of governing a world-spanning empire while maintaining secrecy about fundamental aspects of their authority requires administrative capabilities that extend far beyond normal political or managerial skills to encompass information warfare, psychological manipulation, and strategic planning across timescales that exceed normal human planning horizons. The coordination of policies across diverse governmental institutions, while maintaining operational security that prevents any single department from understanding the full scope of their activities, creates additional layers of complexity that demand superhuman attention to detail. The philosophical implications of their existence as apparently immortal beings who wield temporal authority while claiming divine sanction raises fundamental questions about the nature of legitimate government and the source of political power. Authority in systems where rulers transcend normal human limitations while their subjects remain bound by mortality and ignorance that the rulers themselves impose. The transformation of political authority into something approaching divine prerogative represents corruption of governmental principles that makes democratic reform impossible while rendering revolution the only viable alternative to permanent subjugation. The weight of accumulated decisions across centuries of rule creates moral debts that no individual could ever repay, while generating consequences that continue to unfold in ways that may surprise even those who initiated the original Policias. Their current actions being shaped by commitments made decades or centuries ago, while their future choices being constrained by the need to maintain consistency with historical positions that may no longer serve any legitimate purpose, beyond avoiding admission of past errors. The figure of Imu represents the ultimate perversion of political authority, a being whose very existence transforms the world government's claims of collective leadership into an elaborate deception that has endured for 8 centuries, while concealing the reality that all global authority flows from a single individual whose identity, nature, and motivations remain hidden from every person whose life is shaped by decisions made in absolute secrecy. This shadow ruler embodies the complete corruption of the principles upon which the world government was supposedly founded, the empty throne serving not as symbol of shared power, but as stage prop in a performance designed to conceal the existence of someone whose authority transcends every institution and individual within the system that claims to govern. Through consensus and democratic participation, the revelation of Imu's existence shatters fundamental assumptions about how power operates within the world government, transforming what appeared to be a complex bureaucratic system with multiple centers of authority into a simple dictatorship where all decisions ultimately derive from the will of someone whose accountability to others remains non-existent. While their power to reshape reality according to personal whims appears to be limited only by their imagination and the resources that 8 centuries of accumulated dominance have placed at their disposal. The implications of such concentrated authority extend far beyond immediate political concerns to encompass questions about the nature of legitimate government and the possibility of meaningful reform within systems designed to serve the interests of a single individual whose perspective may be fundamentally alien to normal human experience. The physical throne that symbolizes this hidden authority sits empty in public view, while being occupied by someone whose presence transforms every governmental ceremony and diplomatic proceeding into elaborate theater designed to maintain illusions about power sharing and collective decision-making that serve to legitimize policies that might otherwise be recognized as the arbitrary commands of an absolute dictator whose personal preferences have been elevated to the status of natural law. The psychological impact of discovering that centuries of political development have been orchestrated by a single individual whose existence was carefully concealed creates cognitive dissonance that challenges every assumption about how modern civilization has evolved and what forces have shaped the current global order. The authority that Imu wields over the five elder stars demonstrates the extent to which even the most powerful visible figures within the government are ultimately servants rather than rulers. Their apparent autonomy being carefully managed illusion that serves to deflect attention and responsibility away from the true source of policy decisions while providing convenient scapegoats when governmental actions generate public criticism or international condemnation. The transformation of the Gorosei from ultimate authorities into intermediate administrators reveals the depth of deception that characterizes every aspect of world government operations, their centuries of accumulated experience and political sophistication being subordinated to the will of someone whose judgment they cannot question and whose commands they must implement regardless of personal reservations or professional concerns. The capacity to command the elimination of entire islands and civilizations represents power that transcends normal political authority to encompass capabilities that were once considered exclusively divine. The ability to literally reshape the world's geography according to personal preferences or strategic calculations, transforming individual whims into geological events whose consequences affect millions of people who never consented to such treatment and may never understand why their homes and families were sacrificed to serve objectives they were never permitted to know. The casual exercise of such authority suggests either complete detachment from normal human emotional responses to suffering or psychological development that has progressed so far beyond ordinary human experience that concepts like empathy and moral responsibility no longer apply to decision-making processes that determine the fate of entire civilizations, the selection process that determines which kingdoms face annihilation, and which individuals warrant personal attention from the world's ultimate authority, operates according to criteria that remain completely opaque to outside observation. The apparent randomness of such choices, creating atmosphere of terror that affects every political leader and ordinary citizen who understands that their continued existence depends on avoiding the notice of someone whose attention inevitably brings destruction. The knowledge that any island, any kingdom, any individual can be eliminated without warning or explanation creates psychological pressure that influences every aspect of global politics, while serving to reinforce the hopelessness that prevents organized resistance to governmental authority. The technological capabilities that enable such widespread destruction suggest access to ancient weapons, whose power exceeds anything that modern science can create or comprehend. These artifacts of a lost civilization being wielded by someone whose connection to that vanished era raises disturbing questions about their true age, identity, and relationship to the forces that shape the current world order through the systematic elimination of alternatives that might have led to different forms of human development. The preservation of such capabilities exclusively for use by the world's hidden ruler, while suppressing scientific advancement that might enable others to develop comparable technologies, reveals strategic thinking that operates across timescales that exceed normal human planning horizons. The psychological profile of someone capable of maintaining absolute secrecy about their existence while wielding unlimited power over billions of people suggests either superhuman discipline or fundamental differences from normal human psychology that makes standard categories of moral evaluation. inadequate for understanding their motivations and decision-making processes. The possibility that they represent something other than an ordinary human being who has achieved extraordinary authority, raising implications about the nature of their relationship to the species they rule and the legitimacy of their relation, claims to determine humanity's future according to their personal vision. The loneliness that would normally accompany such complete isolation from peers and equals becomes complicated by questions about whether someone capable of maintaining ultimate secrecy for centuries while exercising global authority actually experiences emotions like loneliness in ways that would be recognizable to ordinary human psychology. Their apparent immunity to the corrupting effects of absolute power, suggesting either transcendence of normal human limitations or such complete corruption that normal psychological categories no longer apply to their mental and emotional processes. The relationship between Imu and the celestial dragons creates additional layers of complexity around questions of legitimacy and authority within the world government hierarchy. Their position as secret ruler of beings who consider themselves gods, revealing either ironic subordination of divine pretensions to mundane political reality, or confirmation that the entire system operates according to principles that transcend normal human understanding of how power should be distributed and exercised within legitimate governmental institutions. The burden of making decisions that affect the entire course of human history while bearing sole responsibility for consequences that will unfold across generations creates moral weight that few individuals could sustain without experiencing psychological breakdown or moral corruption so complete that normal ethical considerations cease to influence their reasoning. The apparent stability that characterizes Imu's rule, suggesting either remarkable personal resilience or fundamental transformation of their relationship to moral responsibility that makes them immune to the psychological costs that would destroy ordinary individuals placed in comparable situations. The knowledge they possess about the true history of the Void Century and their potential role in the events that established the current world order creates implications that extend beyond personal guilt to encompass fundamental questions about the continuity of individual identity across centuries, and the possibility that their authority derives from direct participation in the original crimes that created the system they now maintain through continued suppression of historical truth and systematic elimination of anyone who might expose the foundations upon which their power rests. The intersection between Imu's personal preferences and global policy creates situations where individual psychology influences decisions that affect billions of lives. Their apparent fascination with certain historical figures and artifacts, suggesting personal investments in outcomes that may have nothing to do with rational governance or strategic necessity, while serving psychological needs that remain completely mysterious to anyone who lacks access to their private thoughts and motivations. The technological resources available to someone who commands the entire world government apparatus while maintaining complete secrecy about their existence include capabilities for surveillance, communication, and information manipulation that enable them to monitor global developments while influencing events through mechanisms that remain invisible to those being manipulated. Their ability to shape reality according to their will being limited only by their understanding of how complex systems respond to interventions, and their willingness to accept responsibility for unintended consequences that may emerge from their actions. The theological implications of their existence as someone who wields godlike power while remaining hidden from public view creates parallels with religious concepts about divine authority that operates behind natural phenomena, their role as invisible hand that guides global development according to mysterious purposes, raising questions about whether their rule represents legitimate political authority or something approaching religious revelation that transcends normal categories of governmental legitimacy and democratic accountability. The future implications of their continued rule depend largely on their ultimate objectives and their willingness to adapt their methods as changing circumstances create new challenges to their authority. The emergence of individuals like Luffy, who possess the power to threaten even their ultimate authority, forcing them to make choices about whether their commitment to secrecy outweighs their need to eliminate threats through direct intervention that would expose their existence to global scrutiny. The philosophical questions raised by their existence extend beyond immediate political concerns to encompass fundamental issues about the nature of legitimate authority, the relationship between power and responsibility, and the possibility that some individuals or entities possess capabilities that place them beyond normal human categories of moral evaluation, while their influence over human development creates obligations that they may lack the wisdom or inclination to fulfill responsibly. The instruments of control that the world government employs to maintain order through terror represent the systematic corruption of justice into machinery, designed not to determine guilt or innocence, but to break the spirits of anyone who dares to challenge established authority, their very existence serving as proof that the principles of fair trial and proportionate punishment have been abandoned in favor of systems whose primary purpose is to demonstrate the futility of resistance while providing entertainment for those who derive satisfaction from witnessing the systematic destruction of human dignity and hope. Impel Down rises from the ocean like a monument to humanity's capacity for creating hell on earth. Its 6 levels of carefully designed torment, representing centuries of accumulated expertise in the application of suffering for purposes that transcend simple punishment, to encompass the complete elimination of individual will and the transformation of human beings into broken shells, whose continued existence serves as warning to others who might consider opposing the system that created such horrors. The underwater prison's very location speaks to the thoroughness with which its architects considered every aspect of their design, the crushing pressure of the ocean depths serving as additional barrier to escape, while the isolation from any form of outside contact ensures that whatever happens within its walls remains hidden from public scrutiny. The first level of this descent into systematic evil presents itself with deceptive mildness, its crimson hell designed to provide false hope that imprisonment might involve nothing worse than uncomfortable heat and the presence of creatures whose threat level remains manageable for anyone possessing basic combat skills or survival instincts. This psychological manipulation serves crucial purposes in the overall design of the facility, allowing new prisoners to believe that their situation, while unpleasant, remains within the bounds of civilized punishment before they discover the true nature of what awaits them in the depths below. Their initial relief at avoiding immediate torture, making the eventual revelation of their fate more devastating to whatever psychological defenses they might possess. The second level introduces beasts whose size and aggression exceed anything found in nature. Yet these wild blue gorillas and other creatures serve not as the primary instruments of torment, but as living symbols of how the prison transforms natural order into something twisted and unnatural, their presence creating constant physical danger that prevents prisoners from achieving any sense of safety or routine that might enable them to maintain psychological stability during their incarceration. The knowledge that death could come at any moment from creatures that exist solely to hunt human prey creates stress levels that begin the process of mental breakdown that the deeper levels will complete through more sophisticated methods. The third level plunges prisoners into desert conditions so extreme that survival becomes the only possible focus of attention. The starvation levels heat and lack of water, creating physical suffering that occupies every moment of consciousness, while preventing the kind of mental activity that might enable prisoners to maintain connection to their previous identities or plan for future escape attempts. The psychological impact of watching one's body slowly consume itself while being powerless to obtain the basic necessities of life creates despair that penetrates deeper than any physical torture, while serving the facility's broader purpose of demonstrating the complete helplessness of anyone who opposes governmental authority. The fourth level introduces cold so extreme that it serves as physical manifestation of the emotional and spiritual death that the prison is designed to achieve. It's freezing hell, creating conditions where simple survival requires energy expenditure that leaves no resources for maintaining human dignity or social connection with fellow prisoners. The transformation of human beings into creatures whose only concern becomes avoiding immediate death from hypothermia, serving to eliminate whatever capacity for resistance or solidarity might otherwise develop among those who share common cause against their captors. The fifth level represents the prison's acknowledgement that some individuals possess strength or determination that cannot be broken through environmental extremes alone. It's freezing hell, serving as holding area for prisoners whose danger to the system requires more personalized attention while they await transfer to the sixth level, where their elimination can be accomplished through methods that ensure their complete disappearance from history. The isolation imposed on level 5 prisoners serves multiple purposes beyond simple security, preventing them from sharing knowledge or inspiration with others, while ensuring that their eventual fate remains unknown to anyone who might use their martyrdom as rallying cry for resistance. The sixth level exists in complete secrecy, its very existence denied by official records, while its purpose involves the elimination of individuals whose crimes against the state are considered so severe that their continued existence, even in captivity, poses unacceptable risks to governmental stability, the prisoners held in infinite hell being systematically erased from all records and human memory, as if they had never existed at all. The psychological profile required for staff members who participate in this level of operations reveals the extent to which the prison system corrupts everyone who becomes involved in its functioning, their work requiring them to suppress normal human responses to suffering while participating in activities that violate every principle of justice and human dignity. The administrative structure that governs Impel Down operations reflects the systematic approach the world government takes toward the elimination of conscience and moral reasoning within institutions designed to serve its control. Objectives: the chain of command, ensuring that responsibility for specific acts of torture and murder becomes diffused among so many participants that no individual need feel fully accountable for consequences that result from their collective participation in systematic evil. The recruitment and training processes that produce staff capable of functioning within such an environment require psychological screening and conditioning that transforms ordinary people into instruments of governmental policy whose personal moral reservations have been suppressed or eliminated entirely. Magellan's role as chief warden demonstrates how the prison system elevates individuals whose personal characteristics align with institutional objectives while corrupting whatever positive qualities they might possess through exposure to authority that requires them to suppress empathy and moral reasoning in favor of administrative efficiency and operational security. His poison-based devil fruit abilities make him ideally suited for overseeing a facility whose primary purpose involves the systematic destruction of human life and dignity. Yet, his apparent pride in the effectiveness of his administration reveals psychological compartmentalization that enables him to view mass suffering as professional accomplishment rather than moral failure. The relationship between Impel Down and the broader world government system creates feedback loops where the threat of imprisonment influences behavior throughout society, while the reality of what imprisonment actually entails remains. Hidden from public knowledge, the effectiveness of the facility as deterrent, depending on people's imagination of what might await them, rather than accurate understanding of the systematic torture that defines the actual experience of incarceration. The government's investment in maintaining such facilities reveals the extent to which their authority depends on fear rather than consent. Their willingness to devote enormous resources to the systematic application of suffering, demonstrating that terror forms the foundation upon which their entire system of control ultimately rests. Enies Lobby presents itself as temple to justice, while functioning as elaborate theatre designed to provide legal veneer for decisions that have already been made through political processes that operate outside any framework of law or constitutional procedure. Its courthouse, serving as stage where predetermined guilt is formally confirmed through ceremonies that mockingly simulate fair trial, while ensuring that no prisoner ever leaves with their life or freedom intact. The island's symbolic geography speaks to the cynical sophistication of its designers. The massive waterfall that surrounds the courthouse, creating visual metaphor for the finality of judgments rendered within its walls, while the gates of justice that control access to the facility provide appropriate imagery for processes that transform justice into its opposite. The judicial procedures that operate within Enies Lobby represent the complete perversion of legal process into administrative formality, the judges who preside over trials being selected not for their knowledge of law or commitment to fairness, but for their reliability in producing verdicts that serve governmental interests while maintaining sufficient appearance of legitimacy to satisfy international observers who lack detailed knowledge of how the system actually functions. The speed with which trials are conducted and the uniformity of their outcomes reveal the extent to which legal reasoning has been eliminated from processes that exist solely to provide bureaucratic justification for decisions made through entirely different mechanisms. The psychological impact on defendants who discover that their fate was determined before they ever entered the courtroom creates additional layers of suffering that serve the government's broader objectives of demonstrating the futility of resistance while providing object lessons about what happens to anyone who challenges established authority. Their realization that legal protections they might have believed in are elaborate illusions designed to maintain public confidence in systems that serve only those who control them. The transformation of hope into despair through the revelation that justice is performance rather than principle creates trauma that extends beyond individual victims to affect entire populations who learn that their supposed rights exist only at the sufferance of powers they cannot influence or hold accountable. The staff who operate these judicial ceremonies must develop sophisticated methods of psychological compartmentalization that enable them to participate in systematic injustice while maintaining professional demeanor and personal place. Stability, their work requiring them to suppress moral reasoning while implementing policies that violate every principle of legitimate legal procedure. The training and indoctrination that produces such individuals reveals the extent to which the world government system corrupts everyone who becomes involved in its operations. transforming people who might otherwise serve justice into instruments of oppression, whose personal integrity has been sacrificed to institutional objectives. The architectural symbolism embedded in Enies Lobby's design serves multiple purposes beyond mere aesthetic consideration. The massive scale and imposing grandeur of governmental buildings, communicating messages about power and permanence, while the isolation of the judicial island ensures that whatever happens during legal proceedings remains hidden from public observation or media scrutiny. The gates of justice that control access to different governmental facilities serve as both practical security measures and symbolic representations of the government's claim to embody justice while their operation according to governmental convenience rather than legal principle reveals the true nature of the authority they represent. The relationship between Enies Lobby and other governmental facilities creates networks of control that ensure no prisoner who enters the system ever escapes its influence. Their transfer from trial to imprisonment to elimination being managed through procedures that maintain administrative efficiency while preventing any possibility of outside intervention or legal appeal that might compromise the finality of governmental decisions. The coordination required for such operations demonstrates the systematic nature of governmental oppression, while revealing the extent to which supposedly independent institutions have been integrated into unified machinery designed to serve political rather than legal objectives. The historical evolution of these judicial and penal institutions reflects the gradual corruption of legal principles through centuries of political pressure and administrative convenience. Their transformation from systems designed to serve justice into tools for maintaining governmental authority, revealing the inevitable trajectory of institutions whose accountability mechanisms have been eliminated or compromised beyond repair. The precedents established through 8 centuries of systematic abuse have created legal cultures where injustice becomes normalized, while resistance becomes evidence of criminal intent that justifies even more extreme measures. The international implications of maintaining such facilities while claiming to operate according to principles of justice and human rights create diplomatic challenges that the world government manages through information control and PLAEM's strategic deployment of its military capabilities. Their ability to suppress knowledge about the true nature of their judicial system, depending on their capacity to eliminate witnesses and intimidate potential critics through demonstrations of overwhelming force. The effectiveness of these efforts reveals the extent to which global politics operates according to power dynamics rather than moral principles. International law being subordinated to practical considerations about which governments possess sufficient strength to enforce their preferred interpretations of legal obligation. The Revolutionary Army stands as the moral conscience of a world that has forgotten what freedom truly means, their very existence serving as proof that the human spirit cannot be permanently crushed by systems designed to eliminate hope, while their gradual spread across the globe demonstrates that resistance to tyranny represents not political extremism but the natural response of people who refuse to accept that oppression must be endured simply because it has persisted for centuries. Under the leadership of Monkey D. Dragon, these fighters have transformed individual grievances into collective action, creating networks of resistance that operate according to principles directly opposed to everything the world government represents, while maintaining the moral clarity that enables them to distinguish between liberation and mere destruction. Dragon's philosophy of revolution transcends simple opposition to governmental authority to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of legitimate power and the relationship between those who rule and those who are ruled. His understanding that true freedom cannot be granted by benevolent masters, but must be claimed by people who possess the courage to reject systems that treat them as subjects rather than citizens. The development of his worldview appears to have emerged from direct experience with the world government's corruption during his service as a Marine. His transformation from defender of the established order into its most dangerous enemy, illustrating the psychological journey that many revolutionaries undergo when they discover that institutions they once trusted serve purposes fundamentally opposed to human welfare and dignity. The organizational structure of the Revolutionary Army reflects careful balance between operational security and democratic participation, their decentralized networks enabling local commanders to respond to regional conditions while maintaining coordination with broader strategic objectives that serve the ultimate goal of overthrowing tyrannical authority throughout the Temple world. This approach acknowledges the reality that revolution cannot be imposed from above, but must emerge from grassroots, organizing that addresses specific grievances while building towards systemic change that transforms political relationships, rather than simply replacing one set of rulers with another. The recruitment process that draws individuals into revolutionary activity operates through personal relationships and shared experiences of injustice rather than formal propaganda campaigns, their growth depending on people's recognition that their individual suffering represents part of larger patterns of systematic oppression that can only be addressed through collective action that challenges the foundations upon which the current order rests. The stories that motivate revolutionary commitment reveal common themes of personal loss, betrayal by trusted institutions, and gradual awakening to the reality that reform within existing systems is impossible because those systems are designed to prevent the kinds of changes that would threaten the interests of those who control them. Szabo's transformation from nobleman to revolutionary demonstrates how exposure to systematic injustice can overcome even the most privileged backgrounds when individuals possess sufficient moral sensitivity to recognize that their own comfort depends on the suffering of others. His rejection of inherited wealth and status in favor of dangerous commitment to uncertain ideals, illustrating the psychological processes through which people transcend narrow self-interest to embrace causes that serve broader human welfare. His reunion with his adopted brother Luffy creates additional complexity around questions of family loyalty versus political commitment, their different approaches to challenging authority, reflecting alternative strategies for pursuing common objectives through different means. The liberation campaigns that revolutionary forces conduct across different regions require careful coordination between military action and political education, their success depending not just on their ability to defeat government forces in combat, but on their capacity to help local populations understand that freedom involves responsibilities as well as rights, while providing practical alternatives to governmental services that people have learned to depend on despite their oppressive nature. The challenge of building new institutions while dismantling old ones requires capabilities that extend far beyond military expertise to encompass economic planning, social organization, and cultural transformation that can sustain revolutionary changes after the initial fighting ends. Emporio Ivankov's role as commander of the Grand Line forces demonstrates how revolutionary leadership requires individuals who possess not only strategic thinking and combat effectiveness, but the psychological resilience necessary to maintain hope and determination in the face of overwhelming odds while inspiring others to continue fighting, even when victory seems impossible to achieve. His mastery of hormone-based powers serves as metaphor for the revolutionary capacity to transform not just political structures, but individual identity. helping people discover aspects of themselves that governmental conditioning has trained them to suppress or deny. The relationship between the Revolutionary Army and local populations in liberated territories creates ongoing challenges that test revolutionary commitment to democratic principles versus the practical necessities of maintaining security and providing essential services in regions where governmental infrastructure has been destroyed or abandoned. Their success in managing these transitions, determining whether revolutionary victories represent genuine liberation or simply replacement of one form of authority with another that may prove equally oppressive despite different ideological justifications. The coordination between different revolutionary cells requires communication networks that operate independently of governmental surveillance while maintaining sufficient security to prevent infiltration by intelligence agencies whose primary mission involves identifying and eliminating revolutionary leadership before their activities can threaten vital government interests. The technology and methods employed in these communications reflect innovative approaches to information security that anticipate governmental countermeasures while providing redundancy that enables revolutionary operations to continue even when individual networks are compromised or destroyed. The international scope of revolutionary activities creates diplomatic complexities that extend beyond simple military considerations to encompass relationships with legitimate governments whose own interests may align with revolutionary objectives despite their official obligations to support the world government system. Their ability to provide sanctuary, resources, or intelligence, creating opportunities for revolutionary expansion while requiring careful management to avoid provoking governmental responses that might eliminate potential allies. The moral framework that guides revolutionary decision-making must balance competing demands for effectiveness against principles that distinguish liberation movements from terrorist organizations. Their commitment to protecting civilian populations while conducting military operations against governmental forces, requiring strategic thinking that considers long-term political objectives as well as immediate tactical advantages. The development of rules of engagement that maintain revolutionary legitimacy while enabling effective action against enemies who operate without moral constraints creates ongoing tensions that test individual revolutionaries' commitment to the values they claim to represent. The personal costs that revolutionary commitment imposes on individuals who choose resistance over acceptance of oppressive conditions include not only physical dangers and material hardships, but psychological burdens that come from accepting responsibility for outcomes that affect entire populations, while knowing that failure could result in brutal retaliation against people who trusted revolutionary promises of liberation. The families and communities that revolutionaries leave behind often face persecution that serves as collective punishment designed to discourage others from similar choices, while creating additional moral weight for decisions about how far revolutionary activities should extend into regions where government reprisals might affect innocent people. The resource requirements for sustaining revolutionary operations across multiple theaters of conflict while maintaining the infrastructure necessary for political organization and public education create financial challenges that must be addressed through methods that maintain revolutionary legitimacy while providing adequate support for military activities that compete against governmental forces possessing vastly superior equipment and training. The balance between accepting support from questionable sources versus maintaining ideological purity creates ongoing debates within revolutionary leadership about how to fund liberation activities without compromising the principles that justify such activities. The evolution of revolutionary strategy over the years of Dragon's leadership reflects lessons learned from both successes and failures in different regions. Their adaptation to changing governmental tactics, while maintaining core commitments to democratic principles and human liberation, demonstrating organizational flexibility that enables long-term survival while preserving essential characteristics that distinguish revolutionary forces from the criminal organizations or terrorist groups that governmental propaganda portrays them as representing. The theological implications of revolutionary ideology create additional layers of complexity around questions of legitimate authority and divine sanction for political action. Their rejection of celestial dragon claims to godhood while maintaining respect for genuine religious beliefs, requiring sophisticated understanding of how spiritual principles relate to political organization without falling into the trap of replacing governmental tyranny with religious authoritarianism that serves different masters, while imposing similar constraints on individual freedom and collective self-determination. The anticipated final war that many observers believe is approaching creates pressure on revolutionary leadership to accelerate their activities while ensuring that premature action does not provoke governmental responses that eliminate revolutionary capabilities before they have achieved sufficient strength to survive sustained conflict against the world government's full military power. Their strategic planning requiring accurate assessment of their own capabilities against realistic evaluation of the challenges they will face when the current period of preparation gives way to open warfare. The relationship between revolutionary activities and the broader pirate community creates opportunities for cooperation while maintaining distinctions between liberation movements that serve public welfare and criminal enterprises that exploit governmental weakness for personal benefit. Their ability to coordinate with groups like the Straw Hat Pirates without compromising revolutionary principles, requiring diplomatic skills that acknowledge common enemies while preserving different approaches to challenging established authority through different methods that serve complementary objectives. The legacy that revolutionary activities will leave for future generations depends largely on their success in creating alternatives to current governmental systems that demonstrate the possibility of organizing human society according to principles that prioritize individual freedom and collective welfare over the concentration of power in hereditary elites whose authority rests on systematic oppression of everyone who lacks access to violence and wealth sufficient to challenge their dominance through conventional political or military means. The weight of forbidden knowledge hangs over the world government like a sword suspended by threads of time and terror, the poneglyphs standing as silent witnesses to truth so dangerous that their very existence has justified 8 centuries of systematic murder, cultural destruction, and historical manipulation on scales that dwarf every other crime committed by those who claim authority over human civilization. These indestructible monuments to ancient wisdom represent more than simple historical records. They embody the fundamental challenge to governmental legitimacy that comes from preserved evidence of alternatives to the current order. Their messages carved in stone that cannot be destroyed, serving as eternal reminders that the world once operated according to different principles and could do so again if enough people possessed the courage to reclaim knowledge that has been deliberately hidden from them. The creation of the poneglyphs during the final years of the advanced civilization that preceded the world government's rise represents perhaps the most sophisticated act of resistance in recorded history. Their designers' understanding that physical victory against the alliance of 20 kingdoms might prove impossible, while recognizing that preserving truth for future generations could enable eventual liberation from systems built upon foundations of deliberate ignorance and systematic deception. The selection of materials and techniques that would ensure these records survived whatever catastrophes might befall the civilization that created them demonstrates strategic thinking that operated across timescales beyond normal human, planning horizons, their creators, accepting that they might not live to see their work vindicated, while believing that truth possessed inherent power that would eventually overcome even the most determined efforts at suppression. The ancient language, inscribed upon these stones, serves multiple purposes beyond simple communication. Its complexity, ensuring that casual observers cannot decipher messages intended for those who possess both intellectual capability and moral commitment, sufficient to undertake the dangerous work of historical reconstruction, while its beauty transforms acts of reading into forms of worship that honor the memory of those who sacrificed everything to preserve knowledge for generations yet unborn. The grammar and vocabulary that enable precise expression of concepts that modern languages struggle to articulate suggests psychological and philosophical sophistication that exceeds contemporary human achievement. Their preservation of advanced thinking about governance, technology, and human relationships, offering glimpses of possibilities that the world government has spent centuries preventing people from imagining. The systematic elimination of everyone capable of reading these ancient texts represents perhaps the world government's most sustained and successful campaign of cultural genocide. Their recognition that knowledge preserved in unbreakable stone could only be suppressed through the murder of everyone who possessed the skills necessary to unlock its secrets, while ensuring that such capabilities never developed again, through careful control of educational systems and scholarly institutions. The destruction of O'Hara and its community of archaeologists marked the culmination of this policy, demonstrating that no amount of scholarly dedication or institutional prestige could protect people whose research threatened the foundational lies upon which governmental authority depended. The psychological profile required for scholars who choose to pursue poneglyph research despite knowing that such activities carry death sentences reveals depths of intellectual courage that few people possess, their commitment to truth transcending personal safety, while their work serves future generations who may never know their names or appreciate the sacrifices made on their behalf. The isolation that such researchers must accept as the price of their studies creates additional burdens beyond physical danger, their knowledge creating barriers to normal human relationships, while their awareness of suppressed history generates moral obligations that may prove impossible to fulfill without accepting martyrdom. Robin's survival as the last person capable of reading the ancient language transforms her from simple individual into living repository of human heritage, whose existence poses existential threat to governmental authority regardless of her personal intentions or political commitments. Her very presence in any location creating security concerns that have justified military responses, exceeding those deployed against conventional threats to state stability. The psychological burden of carrying such knowledge while being hunted by every governmental agency creates isolation that exceeds normal human experience, her relationships with others being inevitably compromised by awareness that association with her places them in mortal danger from forces they cannot understand or influence. The content revealed through poneglyph translations challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of historical progress and the legitimacy of current political arrangements. Their accounts of the void century, suggesting that human civilization once achieved levels of social organization, technological capability, and individual freedom that exceed anything possible under systems designed to concentrate power in hereditary elites, whose authority depends on keeping populations ignorant of alternatives that once flourished before being systematically destroyed by forces that preferred control over excellence. The true history of Joy Boy and his relationship to the advanced civilization that created the poneglyphs reveals the extent to which current global politics represent continuation of ancient conflicts rather than new developments. The world government's obsession with preventing his return, reflecting awareness that the principles he represented pose threats to their authority that transcend individual capability to encompass ideological challenges to the legitimacy of any system that treats some people as inherently superior to others based on accidents of birth, rather than demonstrated merit or popular consent. The ancient weapons, whose locations and capabilities are recorded in certain poneglyphs, represent power that could reshape global politics if deployed by individuals committed to liberation rather than domination. Their potential for both creation and destruction, making them objects of fascination and terror for governments whose authority depends on maintaining monopolies over the most devastating forms of violence while preventing anyone else from accessing capabilities that might challenge their supremacy through technological rather than purely political means. Pluton's design as the ultimate warship capable of destroying islands with single shots demonstrates the technological sophistication that characterized the lost civilization, while raising questions about why such capabilities were developed and how they were intended to be used within social systems that apparently prioritized individual freedom over state security. The contrast between ancient weapons designed for liberation and modern military forces created for oppression, revealing fundamental differences in the values that guided their respective creators. Poseidon's nature as living being rather than mechanical construct challenges assumptions about the relationship between technology and biology, while suggesting that the most powerful forces in the world operate according to principles that transcend normal understanding of how power should be acquired, maintained, and deployed. The connection between ancient weapons and specific individuals, rather than governmental institutions, implying that ultimate authority was intended to rest with people whose worthiness was determined by character rather than political position. Uranus remains mysterious even to those who have studied the other ancient weapons, its capabilities and current location representing gaps in knowledge that may prove crucial for understanding how the final conflict between freedom and oppression will unfold. The possibility that this ultimate weapon might already be under governmental control, creating strategic implications that affect revolutionary planning, while the chance that it remains hidden offers hope that the balance of power could shift dramatically if it were discovered by forces committed to liberation rather than domination. The advanced civilization that created both the poneglyphs and the ancient weapons appears to have operated according to principles that prioritized individual development and collective welfare over the accumulation of power by governing elites, their technological achievements serving human flourishing rather than state control, while their political systems apparently enabled widespread participation in decision-making processes that affected entire civilizations. The contrast between their accomplishments and current conditions, suggesting that progress is not inevitable and that regression can be imposed by forces that benefit from keeping populations ignorant and divided. The deliberate destruction of technological knowledge that accompanied the world government's rise represents one of history's greatest crimes against human potential, their systematic elimination of scientific advancement that might threaten their control, creating conditions where entire civilizations must struggle with limitations that need not exist. while being prevented from developing solutions that previous generations had already discovered. The artificial scarcity that characterizes modern life being maintained through policies designed to serve political rather than human needs. The relationship between devil fruits and the lost civilization suggests connections that extend beyond simple technological development to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of human potential and the possibility that abilities currently considered supernatural once represented normal aspects of human experience that were suppressed along with other knowledge deemed too dangerous for common people to possess. The concentration of such powers in rare fruits rather than general human capabilities, reflecting deliberate intervention designed to limit access to abilities that might enable resistance to governmental authority. The gradual revelation of suppressed history through poneglyph translations creates momentum toward eventual confrontation between forces committed to truth and those dedicated to maintaining profitable lies. The increasing public awareness of governmental deception, generating political pressure that may prove impossible to contain through traditional methods of censorship and intimidation, while creating opportunities for revolutionary activities that serve broader human liberation rather than narrow political objectives. The symbolic importance of preserving truth in forms that cannot be destroyed transcends immediate political concerns to encompass fundamental questions about the relationship between knowledge and freedom, the recognition that sustainable liberation requires not just the overthrow of particular governments, but the preservation of wisdom that enables future generations to recognize and resist similar threats to human dignity and collective welfare. The poneglyphs serving as insurance policies against the amnesia that tyrants always attempt to impose on their subjects. And so we reach the present moment in this chronicle of power and corruption, though the world government story approaches its final chapter. From 20 allied kingdoms seeking peace through unity, it has become a machine of oppression that devours freedom in the name of order. Every secret guarded has become a chain binding the world to ignorance. Every truth hidden has grown into a poison that corrupts the very foundations of civilization. The boy who inherited Joy Boy's will now stands at the threshold of revelation, carrying with him the power to shatter 8 centuries of carefully constructed lies. The empty throne that was never meant to be occupied trembles as its true occupant faces challenges that dwarf any threat in recorded history. Rest now, gentle dreamer, and let the weight of accumulated secrets carry you toward peaceful sleep. Tomorrow may bring the dawn of truth, the collapse of ancient lies, and the birth of a world where freedom finally triumphs over the machinery of control. The world government's reign of shadows nears its end.